The knife had entered between his third and fourth ribs from behind. His own knife. The very same Damascus steel knife he'd paid 3 months' salary for 12 years ago. Choi Gyeongho felt the blade twist a quarter turn and realized this wasn't a robbery. It was calculated. It was a familiar hand. He fell face first onto the cutting board, and half a lemon rolled to the edge of the table. Standing behind him was Lee Do-hyun, his apprentice, his boy. 10 years ago, Gyeongho had pulled him out of the dishwasher and had placed him beside him at the stove. He'd taught him how to hold a knife. He'd taught him to feel the meat with his fingers. He'd taught him to distinguish 17 shades of caramel by their scent. Do-hyun was smiling. That very same smile with which he'd said, "Good morning, chef," every morning. 2 men in suits stood nearby, the investors' people. Do-hyun took out a folder and tossed it onto the table next to Gyeongho's face. Recipe books. All 243 recipes. Each one registered under the name Lee Do-hyun. The signature had been forged 6 months ago. For 6 months, that little punk had been carrying his recipes in his briefcase and smiling right into his eyes. Do-hyun is hosting the banquet for the Michelin critic tomorrow. The White Heron restaurant no longer belongs to Gyeongho. 20 years of work had changed hands with a single twist of the knife. Do-hyun leaned down. He licked a drop of blood from the blade. He said calmly that the old dog had cooked for him and that he was grateful for the past 20 years. Darkness flooded Gyeongho's eyes like black broth. Cold. Silence. Neither pain nor fear. Only a single thought crystallized in the void like salt on the bottom of a boiled-down pot. "I'll come for your tongue." Then there was light. The dirty yellow light of a tallow lamp. The stench of rancid fat and sour cabbage. A wooden ceiling stained with soot. Gyeongho lay on the earthen floor in a puddle of slop. The body felt foreign. Small. Skinny. Bones jutted out from under the skin like the ribs of a stray dog. His hands were thin, with broken nails, but his fingers were long. That was the first thing he checked. He bent each one. All 10 obeyed. A tag hung above his head. He saw it just as clearly as he saw the temperature of the oil in a frying pan. Glowing symbols in the air. The name, So Gyeongho. Taste star 1. Apprentice chef class. Essence 4 out of 100. A 1. He was a 1. In his past life, he had fed ministers and movie stars. His béarnaise sauce had moved restaurant critics to tears. He had held 3 Michelin stars for 11 years in a row. And now the display above his head showed a 1 and a measly 4 essence points. The door flew open. A fat woman in a greasy apron grabbed him by the collar and dragged him out into the hallway. She screamed that he'd oversalted the porridge, that because of him, 3 mercenaries had left without paying, that half-breeds had no place in the kitchen. She threw him out through the back door into the alley. Gyeongho fell into the mud. He stood up. He brushed off his knees. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, but not from fear, from hunger. The young cook hadn't eaten in 2 days. He stood in an alley in an unfamiliar city, knowing neither the language nor the map nor the name of this world. But he did know that sinewy meat must be cut against the grain. That acid opens the meridians. That 63 degrees for 3 hours turns any cut of meat into a concentrator of essence 12 times denser than boiling. He knew 400 techniques this world had never seen. And he knew the name of the man whose tongue he was to cut out. The alley led out onto the street. The city was called Kvaran. People wore clothes made of coarse fabric. Plates hung above their heads. 5s, 2s. A rare 3 flashed on a city guard officer. The world lived by the law of taste. Magic here was derived from food. Every dish carried essence that settled in the eater's meridians and transformed into mana, strength, and regeneration. But they cooked here as if in the Stone Age. They boiled grain in water. They salted meat until it turned black. They tossed herbs into boiling water and called it a potion. Gyeongho walked past the market stalls. A vendor was selling boiled turnips for 3 copper coins a bowl. A brazier was burning above the turnips. A rankless dish. Essence 2. He looked at that number and for the first time in 2 days in a foreign body, felt something resembling hunger. Not physical. Professional. These people didn't know what umami was. They didn't know about fermentation. They didn't know about the Maillard reaction. They burned off 90% of the essence while cooking and considered the remaining 10% the absolute limit. He could turn this kitchen upside down with just one frying pan. But first, he needed a frying pan. And a roof. And at least one plate of food, because the cook's body was starting to shut down. His legs buckled. He sat down against the wall of a tavern with a sign depicting a dead fox. A girl of about 17 came out the door. Skinny, quick eyes, a stained apron. She looked him up and down. She said he looked worse than yesterday's soup. She said a bowl of cold porridge. Gyeongho picked up a spoon. He tasted it. Essence 3. The porridge was disgusting. The grains were overcooked into a paste. No salt. But it was food. He ate it all. The display above his head flashed. Essence 4 became 5. 1 point. 1 measly point for a whole bowl. The girl's name was Yoon Sori. She said that if he knew how to peel turnips, the owner might let him stay in the back room for the night. Gyeongho looked at the sign. The Dead Fox. An unrated dump on the outskirts of Hwaran. He stood up and went inside. The kitchen was a disaster. A layer of grease a finger's width thick covered the walls. The knives were dull. The stove was smoking. Meat lay on the table in a beam of sunlight streaming through the window. There were traces of mold on the cutting board. The cook was chopping onions with the same knife she'd used to scrape the grime off the pot. Gyeongho stood in the doorway and counted. 14 mistakes. He saw 14 glaring mistakes that were killing the essence even before the food made it onto the plate. The tavern owner looked at him with cloudy eyes and said, "Peel the turnip. The barrel's in the corner." Gyeongho picked up the knife. It was dull. He ran his finger along the blade. He took a shard of stone out of his pocket, one he'd picked up in an alley. He sat down on the floor and began sharpening it. Sori stood in the doorway and watched. Then she said quietly that no one here kept a knife like that. Gyeongho didn't answer. He sharpened the knife and thought about Do-hyun, about how he would turn the blade a quarter turn, about how, somewhere in this world, there was a man to whom he owed that twist. The stone scraped against the steel. Sparks fell onto the earthen floor. Gyeongho was sharpening a knife in the kitchen of an unrated tavern on the edge of an unfamiliar world, and the sign above his head glowed with a single light. But his fingers remembered. His fingers remembered everything. The first mercenary walked into the dead fox on the 3rd day. He was as sturdy as a bull's carcass, with a 2-star badge and 74 essence out of 200. His name was Park Tae-soo. He sat down at a table, slapped the surface with his palm, and demanded meat porridge because tomorrow he had a contract to clear out a wolf's lair south of Hwaran, and he needed at least 80 essence to stay alive. The cook served him a bowl. Tae-soo scooped some up. He chewed. His badge flashed above him. +3 essence. From a whole bowl of meat porridge. +3. Tae-soo spat the porridge back into the bowl. He said the mud in the nearby ditch tasted better. He hurled the bowl against the wall. The cook screamed. The owner waved his arms and ran off to apologize. Gyeongho stood in the corner and looked at the plate above the mercenary's head. 74 out of 200. His body is strong, but his meridians are clogged with sludge from poor nutrition, like pipes into which slop has been poured for years. The essence wasn't being absorbed because the channels weren't letting it through. He needs acid. He needs heat. He needs the right incision. Gyeongho walked over to the table. Tae-soo looked straight down. A 1-star chef. A novice. A kid. Tae-soo asked what he needed. Gyeongho silently took the broken plate. He went to the kitchen. The cook tried to stop him. He didn't turn his head. He opened the meat drawer. Stringy scraps. The kind everyone threw away because they were impossible to chew. Gyeongho took a piece. He sniffed it. The meat wasn't rotten, but it had been sitting in the sun and the top layer had started to oxidize. He cut off the crust. Underneath, the meat was dark red. Good muscle, tight fibers. In this world, it was considered waste. In his past life, he would have turned a piece like this into a confit served for $300. He placed the meat on the cutting board. He looked at the fibers. He ran his finger across them. He found the grain. He took the knife he'd been sharpening for 2 days. The first cut went against the grain. Thin slices, each as thick as a pinky. Salt, coarse rock salt from the bag by the wall. He rubbed it between his palms and spread it evenly over the meat. Pressed it down. He waited 20 heartbeats. He tenderized each chunk with the back of the knife. 4 taps per piece. No more. The fibers softened but didn't tear. A cast iron skillet sat on the hearth. Gyeongho placed his palm on it, 2 fingers width from the surface. He closed his eyes. Colored layers floated above the metal. Blue, green, yellow, orange. He could see the temperature. It was the only thing that had carried over from his past life, along with his memory. The heavenly table technique. Temperature controlled down to the degree. The skillet glowed yellow-orange, 180 degrees. Too hot. He moved the coals aside. He waited. Yellow-green, 147. More. Green with a blue rim, 122. He placed the meat on the pan. 47 seconds. He counted in his head. Every second mattered. At 122 degrees, the Maillard reaction began on the surface, but didn't penetrate deeper than 3 millimeters. The essence inside the meat didn't burn. It was sealed in. 47 seconds. He flipped it over. Another 47. He took it off, placed it on a cutting board, covered it with an upside-down plate. He waited. The cook stood behind him, silent. She didn't understand what he was doing. No one in this world let meat rest. Everyone served it straight from the fire. Gyeongho waited exactly as long as it took for the juices inside to redistribute. Then he removed the plate. He sliced the meat into a fan shape. The thin slices landed on the porridge he'd scooped from the communal pot. The porridge was shoddy, but it was hot and starchy. The fat from the meat would melt over the surface. The final step. He took the clay jug the cook used to wash vegetables. He sniffed it. Vinegar. Mild fruit vinegar. Just 1 drop. He measured it out with the tip of his knife and drizzled it over the meat. The acid would react with the fat. The fat would unlock the umami in the meat. The umami would flow through the meridians like a key in a lock. This world didn't know the word umami. It didn't know that meat contains glutamate. It didn't know that acid and fat together create a resonance that triples the absorption of the essence. Gyeongho brought out the plate. He set it in front of Tissue. The mercenary looked at him as if he were a cockroach. Then he looked at the plate. The meat looked different. Not gray, overcooked mush. Thin slices with a golden crust on top of porridge with an oily sheen and a scent that made his mouth water. Tissue picked up a spoon. He scooped up some meat and porridge. He put it in his mouth. He chewed. He froze. The display above his head lit up. The numbers shot up. +12, +27, +47. He swallowed and scooped up another spoonful. +68, +89, +112. The mercenary's eyes widened. He chewed and couldn't stop. His body demanded more on its own. His meridians opened up. Toxins were being expelled through his pores. Sweat was streaming down Taisu's face, but he didn't notice. Another spoonful. +148, +186. A star flashed. 2 became 3. Park Tae-soo had just leaped over an entire star with a single plate of food. The spoon slipped from his fingers. He looked at his hands. Steam rose from his palms, real, hot steam. His meridians were blowing like pipes that had finally been cleared. The cook crossed herself. The tavern owner slowly rose from his table. Sori froze with the tray. Tae-soo raised his head. He looked at Gyeongho. He asked where he'd come from. Gyeongho wiped his knife on his apron. He said the coals in the hearth were too dry, that the meat was sitting out in the sun, that this was the last thing he'd say for free. Tae-soo didn't answer. He stared at his badge. 3 stars. 12 out of 300. A new rank. A new ceiling. All from a single plate. The owner approached Gyeongho. He asked how much he wanted to work in the kitchen. Gyeongho said he needed his own section of the hearth, his own knives, and meat stored in the shade. The owner swallowed and nodded. Sori watched Gyeongho as he returned to the kitchen. Then she approached Tae-soo. She asked quietly what he had felt. Tae-soo looked at her and said it was as if someone had pulled rusty nails out of his stomach, that his body felt light, that he could feel every toe for the first time in 3 years. Sori jotted this down in her black notebook, which she carried tucked into her belt. She didn't yet know why she was writing it down, but her hand reached out on its own toward the paper. In the kitchen, Gyeongho washed the frying pan. He sat down on the floor against the wall. The display above his head still showed a 1. Essence 5 out of 100. He had fed someone else's meridians. The other person's counter had jumped to a star, but his own hadn't budged a single point. The tax of the tongue. He is required to taste every dish rated above 5 stars himself before serving it. But his novice chef's body couldn't handle essence higher than 1 star. If he served a 3-star dish and took a bite, his meridians would rupture. Blood would gush from his throat. The stronger those he fed became, the more vulnerable he himself became. Gyeongho sat on the floor, staring at his slender fingers. Somewhere in this world, Lee Do-hyun was eating and growing. Somewhere in this world stood a man to whom Gyeongho had promised to cut out his tongue. And Gyeongho himself had 1 star and a knife he'd been sharpening for 2 days. Enough. Enough for a start. The next morning, Tae-soo brought 3 men, all mercenaries, all second class. One had a bandage around his ribs with a brown stain. Tae-soo told them to sit down and shut their mouths. Sori took their order. 4 servings of meat porridge. A regular serving of porridge cost 5 copper coins. Gyeongho came out of the kitchen and said it would be 20. The mercenaries grumbled. Tae-soo slammed his hand on the table and ordered them to pay. They paid. Gyeongho returned to the kitchen. There was enough meat left in the crate for 6 servings. In 3 days, he'd have to buy more, but the tavern had no money. But that didn't matter now. What mattered now was getting it right. He took 4 pieces of stringy meat. He examined each one separately. The fibers ran in different directions, different densities, different fat content. He adjusted the cut for each piece. He sliced the first one thinly because the fibers were coarse. The second was thicker because the muscle was softer. He tenderized the third one longer. He barely touched the fourth. Salt. Cast iron. 122 degrees. 47 seconds. Rest. Slicing. Mash. A drop of vinegar. 4 plates came out of the kitchen one after another. Sori carried them, feeling the heat through the clay. The mercenaries ate. The first one stopped at the 3rd spoonful. His vitals spiked by 34 points. The second one finished his meal, plus 47. The third, with a bandage around his ribs, ate slowly. Gyeongho watched from the doorway. The wounded mercenary chewed and grimaced. Not from pain in his ribs, from something else. His meridians were damaged. The essence flowed in and hit a block. The meter jumped only 19 points. Gyeongho took note. He'll need a different dish. Tomorrow. Tae-soo ate his second serving. This time, the meter showed only a plus 22. His body had adapted. Repeating the same dish yielded diminishing returns. Gyeongho knew this. In the restaurant business, it was called palate fatigue. New flavors were needed. New techniques. New ingredients. But for now, this was enough. By evening, rumors were spreading through Hwaran. Mercenary Park Tae-soo had become a 3 overnight. 4 twos had raised the essence by 50 points in a single plate. At the Dead Fox. That dump on the outskirts. The next day, 7 more came. Then 12. Then Gyeongho stopped counting. They ran out of meat on the second day. The tavern owner ran around the market with a sack of copper coins. Gyeongho told him to buy only from the 3rd butcher from the corner. He was the only one who hung the meat in the shade instead of in the sun. The owner didn't argue. He saw the numbers. Every day, Gyeongho stood by the hearth and cooked. 4 plates, 6, 10. He couldn't manage more than 10. The young cook's body was growing tired. His hands trembled after the 8th serving. His meridians ached from the heat of the hearth. He was a 1. His limit was lower than that of anyone he fed. Sori worked in the dining room non-stop. She recorded every customer in a black notebook. Name, rank, how much they ate, how much they gained. Gyeongho hadn't asked her to do this. She'd started on her own. On the 5th day, she came to him in the kitchen that evening and showed him the entries. Tae-soo, 3 stars. First serving plus 186. Second serving plus 22. Third serving plus 9. Declining. Meat with vinegar doesn't work on him anymore. Gyeongho looked at the notes. Then he looked at Sori. He said she had a good eye. She replied that you could see more in the dining room than in the kitchen. That was true. Gyeongho saw the food. Sori saw the people. He took her notes and sat with them until dawn. He calculated. He mapped it out in his head. The young cook's body didn't know fractions, but the brain of the 37-year-old chef remembered every formula in food chemistry. The acid worked on blocked meridians. Once. Then you have to change the vector. Fat for those with dry channels. Bitterness for those whose meridians are too dilated and whose essence is leaking away. Salt for stabilization after a spike. 4 types of eaters. 4 different approaches. In his past life, this was called menu personalization. Here, it was a weapon. In the morning, he sent Sori to the butcher for bones. Everyone threw the bones away. They saw no value in them. Sori brought back a bag for 2 copper coins. Gyeongho chopped up the bones. He poured water over them. He set them over low heat. He covered the pot. The cook asked why he was boiling empty bones. Gyeongho didn't answer. He was making broth. 16 hours over the very lowest heat. Temperature, 87 degrees. Not boiling, simmering. The collagen from the bones dissolved into the liquid, drawing with it the essence that no one in this world heat. The temperature was 87 degrees. Not boiling, simmering. The collagen from the bones dissolved into the liquid, drawing with it an essence that no one in this world knew how to extract from bone tissue. By evening the next day, the broth was ready. Golden, thick. The display above the pot glowed with numbers that made Gyeongho himself take a step back. Dish, 2 stars. Essence, 340. From bones that cost 2 copper coins. The cook stood nearby, holding her breath. The owner peered into the pot and asked what kind of sorcery this was. Gyeongho said it was broth. Just broth. The tax of the tongue. He had to taste it before serving. A 2-star dish, and he himself was only a 1-star chef. Gyeongho scooped up a spoonful. His body tensed. His insides twisted. He felt the essence of the broth enter his meridians and begin to press against the walls like water in a thin hose. It hurt. It was hot. The gauge flashed. Essence 5 became 14, then 23. Then it stopped. 23 out of 100. A leap. But it came at a price. Gyeongho doubled over. He coughed. A red drop remained on his palm. Blood. His meridians hadn't ruptured, but a tear was close. He wiped his mouth. Sori stood nearby with a towel. She saw the blood. She said nothing. He told her to serve it. The wounded mercenary from the 3rd day had returned. Gyeongho handed him the broth. Hot, fatty, no meat, just liquid. The mercenary drank it. The bandage on his ribs had darkened with sweat. The gauge jumped. Plus 78. The blockage in his meridians had softened. Collagen was enveloping the damaged channels and mending them from the inside. The mercenary set down the bowl. He touched his ribs. He said it didn't hurt. For the first time in 3 weeks, it didn't hurt. Sori made a note of it. Gyeongho returned to the kitchen and sat down against the wall. 23 out of 100. He needed to reach 100 to become a 2. Every sip of his own broth tore at his meridians. Those he fed grew in a single sitting. He clawed his way up 1 point at a time and paid for each one with blood. It wasn't fair. But he'd been working in the kitchen for 20 years. Unfairness was the norm. The dead fox's fame is growing. Mercenaries are pouring in. Gyeongho discovers the diminishing returns of repeat dishes and develops a system of 4 types of eaters. He cooks his first bone broth, 2 stars, 340, essence from bones for 2 copper coins. The tongue's tax. He tastes the broth himself. The essence jumps from 5 to 23, but he coughs up blood. Sori keeps a blacklist of customers. People in silk gloves arrived on the 8th day. There were 3 of them. Clean clothes, expensive belts, the trio's insignia. They didn't sit at the communal table, but stood at the bar and told the owner that meat deliveries to the dead fox would cease starting tomorrow. The new price per pound had tripled. The contract with the butcher was terminated. The owner turned pale. He asked why. The eldest of the 3 smiled and said that young master Hwan Min-jung had personally ordered it. Dead Fox uses meat from the Hwan House's suppliers. All butchers in Hwaran work through the Hwan House. Anyone who doesn't work through the Hwan House doesn't work at all. The owner sat down on a bench and covered his face with his hands. Sori stood by the wall with a tray. Her fingers were as white as snow. Gyeongho came out of the kitchen. He looked at the 3 men. He looked at their gloves. Silk. Identical. The Hwan House livery. He remembered the name. Hwan Min-jun, the 2nd son. The 5th star. The one who had thrown the apprentice cook, So Kyung-ho, out of the tavern on the day of rebirth. The one who had personally declared that half-breeds had no place in the kitchen. Gyeongho hadn't seen his face that day. The apprentice cook's body had been lying face down on the floor, but he remembered the name. Hwan Min-jun. First, Do-hyun. But first he had to get through today, and today's problem was wearing silk gloves and covering the meat. The eldest of the 3 looked at Gyeongho and laughed. He said that this was the very same half-blood kitchen boy who supposedly works mercenaries in 3s. He said that the young master had asked him to pass on a message. If the kitchen boy got out of town by morning, his fingers would remain intact. Gyeongho didn't blink. He stared at the man's gloved hands. Meaty fingers. A ring on the ring finger beneath the glove. A 3-star badge. Essence 187 out of 300. Blocked meridians. Too much fatty food, not enough acid. A typical aristocrat. A strong body. Meridians clogged with filth. Gyeongho said he didn't need any meat. All 3 fell silent. The innkeeper raised his head. Sori turned around. Gyeongho repeated himself. He didn't need any meat. Let the house of Hwan choke on their own meat. He returned to the kitchen. The 3 left. The innkeeper ran up to Gyeongho and whispered that without meat, the tavern was dead. That mercenaries came for meat porridge. That bone broth was good, but bones also had to be bought from the butcher, and the butcher was under House Hwan. Gyeongho listened. Then he told Sori to bring him everything in the pantry. Sori brought it. A sack of grain, half a sack of dried peas, a turnip, an onion, 3 heads of cabbage that had started to wilt, salt, vinegar, a bottle of oil nearly empty, a clay pot with something fermented at the bottom. Gyeongho opened the pot. He sniffed. Soybeans. Someone had once tossed them into a pot of water and salt and forgotten about them. They'd been sitting there for months, maybe a year. A dark film floated on the surface. The smell stung his nose. The cook told him to throw it out. Everyone told him to throw it out. Gyeongho lifted the pot and held the liquid up to the light. Dark brown. Thick. Glutamate. Natural soy sauce. Homemade, ugly, unripe. But that was it. No one in this world knew that forgotten beans and salt produce what this pot contains. They didn't know the word fermentation. They didn't know that bacteria break down protein into amino acids, and that amino acids carry the essence in a form that is absorbed 3 times faster than from the whole product. Gyeongho set the pot on the table. He told Sori to buy 10 pounds of dried soybeans. They're cheap. Nobody wants them. They're poor people's food. Sori ran off. While she was gone, Gyeongho peeled the turnips. He chopped the onions. He cooked the peas. Everything over low heat. Everything with precise temperature control. The turnip at 94 degrees for 40 minutes. Not boiling. Simmering. The cells weren't destroyed but softened. The essence remained inside. The peas at 88 degrees for 2 hours. The starch gelatinized and became a carrier. The onions in a dry skillet at 154 degrees. Caramelization. The sugar in the onions turned into a dark sweetness unknown in this world. The aroma from the kitchen crept into the dining room, then out onto the street. The mercenaries who'd come for meat stood at the bar, sniffing the air. There was no meat, but the scent tugged at their stomachs and wouldn't let go. Gyeongho brought out the first plate. Pea porridge with braised turnips and caramelized onions. On top, 3 drops from a forgotten pot. A dark liquid. Soy sauce. A placard above the plate. 2 stars. Essence 280. From peas. From turnips. From onions. The cost of the dish was 7 kopecks. Tisu tasted it first. Silently. He chewed for a long time. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He asked what that dark stuff on top was. Gyeongho said it was his business. Tisu grunted and finished eating. The rating shot up 44 points. A different vector. A different taste. There was no loss because the body received an unfamiliar combination and the meridians reacted anew. 9 mercenaries ate that evening. Not a single piece of meat. The average essence gain was 38 points per plate. From vegetables and beans for 7 kopecks. By nightfall, Gyeongho was sitting in the kitchen doing the math. 80 copper coins in revenue, 73 copper coins in expenses, a profit of 7 copper coins. Not much, but the tavern is still in business, and it no longer needs meat from the house of Hwan. The owner stood in the doorway and looked at Gyeongho the way people look at someone they don't understand but are afraid of losing. Sori sat nearby, updating the ledger. Gyeongho told her to buy more beans tomorrow, and clay pots, 10 of them. She asked why 10. He replied that in 3 months, each pot would contain sauce, of varying ages, of varying strengths, and that each pot would be worth more than griffin meat. Sori looked at him and asked how he knew all this. Gyeongho replied that the charcoal was too dry and that it was time to sleep. She didn't ask any further questions. That night, Gyeongho lay on the floor of the storeroom and stared at the ceiling. Hwan Min-jung had cut off the meat supply, so he knows. So rumors had reached the Hwang house. The mercenary had become a trio at the Dead Fox. This was a blow to the monopoly. The Hwang house supplies food and controls the ranks through supply control. A cook who makes trios out of leftovers disrupts the entire system. Min-jung won't stop at the meat. He'll come for the tavern, for Sori, for his fingers. Gyeongho clenched his fists in the darkness. His fingers were intact, all 10 of them. And each one was worth more than the entire house Hwan put together. Tomorrow he'd start fermenting the beans. In 3 months, he'd have a weapon this world had never seen. But Min-jung wouldn't give him 3 months. That meant he needed something faster. Gyeongho closed his eyes and began to run through the 400 techniques he'd brought with him from his past life. Somewhere among them was one that required neither meat nor time. Just fire and a steady hand. He found it by dawn. The technique was called dry caramel. In his past life, Gyeongho had used it for desserts. Sugar is heated without water to 154 degrees. The molecules break down and reassemble. Bitterness, sweetness, smoke. 3 flavors in one. In this world, sugar was expensive, but honey was cheap. Wild bees lived in the cliffs west of Hwaran, and old women sold honey for a copper coin a handful. No one cooked with honey. They ate it raw, spread it on bread, added it to cold remedies. No one knew that honey begins to caramelize at 118 degrees, that at 146 degrees it releases furfural, which opens the channels in the meridians responsible for regeneration, that at 154 degrees it turns into a bitter, glassy mass that, upon contact with saliva, releases the essence in an instantaneous burst. Gyeongho sent Sori to fetch honey at dawn. She returned with a clay jug. 8 copper coins. He took a cast iron bowl, the smallest one. He set it on the coals. He waited. Colored layers above the metal. Blue, green, yellow, greenish yellow. 118. He added a spoonful of honey. The honey spread across the hot cast iron. It sizzled. It bubbled. The color began to change. Golden, amber, brown. Gyeongho counted the seconds. At 118, the honey was losing its water. At 132, the sugars began to break down. He moved the pan closer to the center of the coals. The temperature crept upward. 140. 146. The smell changed. It went from sweet to bitter and smoky. 4 more seconds. 154. He removed the pan from the heat. The honey had turned into a dark, glassy drop the size of a fingernail. The pan glowed above it. 2 stars. Essence 190. 1 spoonful of honey for 1 copper coin. The cook was looking over his shoulder. Her mouth was open. She asked how a piece of burnt honey could have stars. Gyeongho didn't answer. He made a second drop, a third, a fourth. By noon, there were 20 caramel drops on the tray. Each was a 2-star drop. Each cost 1 copper coin to make. Sori stood nearby and counted. 20 drops. If sold for 15 copper coins each, that's 300 copper coins in revenue against 20 in expenses. She looked at Gyeongho, and for the first time, he saw more than just curiosity in her eyes. Fear. She said that if anyone found out, he'd be killed. She was right. A 2-star dish made from a copper coin's worth of honey was disrupting the entire economy of Hwaran. The Hwan House sold 2-star dishes through its restaurants for 120 copper coins per plate. And Gyeongho was doing the same thing for 1 copper coin on a kitchen plate. If this hit the market, the monopoly would collapse. Not in a year, in a week. Gyeongho told Sori that she was right, that they'd kill him if they found out, so he shouldn't sell it. Not yet. The drops were for someone else. He took 1 drop, put it in his mouth. The tax of the tongue. His body twisted. Heat coursed through his meridians like boiling water through his veins, but less intense than from the broth. The caramel released the essence in a sharp, short jolt. Not pressure, but a prick. The meridians held up. The display flickered. 23 became 31, plus 8. Not much compared to what his clients were getting, but no blood, no rupture. 8 points he could repeat every day. Gyeongho took a second drop. 31 became 37. A third. 37 became 41. Declining, but slower than with meat. The caramel worked through a different channel. By evening, he'd eaten 6 drops. Essence 54 out of 100, halfway to the 2nd star. His meridians ached but held firm. There was no blood. He could reach 100 in 10 days if his body could hold out. Sori wrote down every number. Taeshu arrived in the evening. He tried a drop. His gauge flashed up 12 points. For a level 3, that wasn't much. But Taeshu didn't complain. He chewed the drop and froze. He said his mouth felt hot and cold at the same time, that his tongue went numb for 3 seconds and then exploded with a flavor he'd never tasted before. He said it was like getting punched in the jaw and wanting more. Gyeongho nodded. In his past life, restaurant critics had written about this effect. The contrast between bitterness and sweetness triggered a rush of endorphins. Here, that rush converted into an instant opening of the meridians. Taeshu asked if he could take 5 of them with him for a mission to eat during combat. Gyeongho thought for a moment. The caramel released the essence instantly. Not in 6 hours like regular food, in seconds. This meant that a fighter could chew a drop in the heat of battle and receive mana directly into their meridians. No cook on this continent made food for battle. Everyone ate before or after. The concept of a combat ration didn't exist. Gyeongho gave Taesei 10 drops, for free. Taesei looked at him and said that if anyone touched this tavern, they'd have to step over his dead body. Gyeongho replied that there was no need for dead bodies. They just had to come back alive and tell the other mercenaries. Taeshu grinned and left. He was gone for 3 days. On the 4th day he returned. With him were 20 mercenaries, all ranks 2 and 3. Everyone wanted the caramel drops. Taeshu explained that during the mission, his squad had been ambushed. The wolves were 4th rank. A 2nd rank mercenary doesn't survive against a 4th rank. Taeshu handed out the drops. 3 of them chewed them during the fight. Their bodies flared with mana for 6 seconds. 6 seconds on the brink of a 3rd star in the midst of the battle. That was enough. The rank 4 wolves scattered, not a single casualty in the squad. For the first time in 2 years. Among the 20 mercenaries stood one whom Gyeongho didn't recognize. An old man. Thin. With a long scar across his left eye. A 4-star insignia. The commander of the mercenary company. He didn't sit down at the table. He stood by the door and looked at Gyeongho. Then he approached. He leaned in. Quietly asked who had trained him. Gyeongho replied that no one had. The commander shook his head. He said he'd seen something like that once. 20 years ago. A cook had done something similar. Then they found him dead. Without a tongue. With his meridians torn out. And that the boy should be more careful because the people who did that were still alive. Gyeongho didn't answer. He looked at the commander and thought. The cook from 20 years ago. Dead. Without a tongue. The Silver Spoon Guild. The former heavenly table. The one whose soul had called to him through the lemon on the cutting board. Gyeongho tucked that information deep into his memory. He asked the commander what he would like to eat. The commander sat down. He ordered porridge. Gyeongho served him pea and turnip porridge with 3 drops of soy sauce and a single drop of caramel on top. A combination. The acidity of the broth plus the fat of the porridge plus the umami of the sauce plus the bitterness of the caramel. 4 vectors. Resonance. The plate above the commander flashed. The counter started. Plus 22. Plus 45. Plus 67. Plus 89. For a 4, this was impossible. 4 is typically scored 2 or 3 points per dish at the expensive restaurants of the Hwan House. Plus 89 from porridge and honey. The commander set down his spoon. His hands were shaking. He looked at Gyeongho and his scar turned white. He said one word. Impossible. Then he stood up. He bowed. He turned and walked out without looking back. 20 mercenaries watched him leave in silence. Commander 4 bowed to Cook 1. Tai Su whistled. Sori took note. Gyeongho wiped his hands and returned to the kitchen. The plaque above his head still glowed with the same 1. Essence 54 out of 100. He was weaker than anyone else in this room. But everyone in this room ate from his hands. And somewhere on the other side of the world, Lee Do-hyun was climbing the ranks with stolen recipes. And here, Gyeongho was making something out of honey for a single copper coin that was breaking the monopoly of an entire trading house. He looked at his hands. They weren't trembling. His fingers were warm from the cast iron. Tomorrow he'll make 30 more drops. In a week, he'll reach 100 and become a 2. In 3 months, the first sauce will be ready. And then Hwang Min-jum will find out what happens when you cut off the meat supply to a chef who can cook out of thin air. An old woman came in on the 9th evening. Gyeongho didn't notice her right away because she sat in the darkest corner of the room and didn't raise her hands. Sori saw her first. She walked over and asked what she'd like to order. The old woman said she wanted a bowl of soup, any kind, the cheapest one, and that she didn't have a single copper coin. Sori looked at the owner. The owner waved his hand. He had no intention of feeding beggars for free. Sori took a copper coin from her apron and placed it on the counter. She said she'd pay for it herself. She brought the old woman a bowl of pea soup with a drop of soy sauce. The old woman picked up a spoon. At that moment, came out of the kitchen to collect the dirty bowls. He was walking past the corner, and out of the corner of his eye, saw the old woman bringing the spoon to her mouth. And he stopped. She was holding the spoon wrong. No, she was holding the spoon right, really right. 3 fingers, thumb on the bottom, index and middle fingers on top, pinky tucked away. It was a taster's grip. A professional grip that allows you to control the volume of liquid in your mouth down to the last drop. In his past life, Gyeongho had spent 3 months teaching this grip to his students. Here, no one knew it. The old woman tasted the soup. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She looked straight at Gyeongho. The plaque above her head glowed with a 1. Essence 7 out of 100. A pauper. Weak. But her eyes were different. There was no hunger in them. There was calculation. She said quietly that the sauce was young, that the beans had been aged for less than a year, that the salt was coarse and unrefined, and that this gave it a mineral aftertaste that interfered with the pure umami. Gyeongho froze. She had uttered the word umami. In this world, no one knew that word. He himself had never once spoken it aloud. She said it as if it were something familiar, like the name of an old acquaintance. Gyeongho sat down across from her, silently. He watched. The old woman finished her soup. She set down the bowl. She wiped her lips with the back of her hand. She said that the boy cooked strangely, that the temperature was too precise, that the cuts were too even, that only one person had ever cooked that way, and that that person had been dead for 20 years. Gyeongho asked who she was. The old woman smiled. She was missing some teeth, but the smile was neat, controlled. She said her name was Sonim, the guest. That she came to some tavern every evening and asked for a bowl of soup. That she'd been doing this for 20 years, ever since her teacher died. Gyeongho felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. Teacher. 20 years ago, the mercenary commander had spoken of a cook who'd been killed and had his tongue cut out. The previous heavenly table. He asked who her teacher had been. Sonim stopped smiling. She said his name was Master Baek Dong-soo, the 9th star, the highest rank of the celestial table on the Cheongryo continent. He was killed by the Silver Spoon Guild for wanting to share his techniques with the peasants. The guild ripped out his tongue. They burned his meridians. They burned his manuscripts. His body was thrown into the river. Sonim was his last disciple. She was 23 years old at the time and held the rank of 4th star. She fled. She destroyed her own meridians so that her rank would drop to 1 and no one could find her by her rank. For 20 years, she wandered like a beggar. For 20 years, she kept the techniques in her head that she couldn't use because her meridians were dead. Gyeongho listened and remained silent. Then he asked why she had come specifically to the Yellow Fox. Sonim said she hadn't come there on purpose, that she walked into a random tavern every evening. But when she tasted his soup, she understood. Temperature control, preservation of the essence, resonance of flavors. The boy cooks just like her teacher. No, different. The techniques are different, unfamiliar, but the result is the same. And that means either the boy has somehow miraculously rediscovered the path of the celestial table, or he has come from somewhere where that path was never lost. Gyeongho was silent for a long time. Then he said the charcoal was too dry and it was time to sleep. Sonim laughed softly. She said he sounded like an old man. She stood up and walked toward the door. Gyeongho called after her that there would be broth tomorrow, that if she came, he'd pour her a bowl for free. Sonim stopped. She didn't turn around. She said she'd come, and she walked off into the darkness. Sori was standing behind the counter and heard everything. She approached Gyeongho and quietly asked who that woman was. Gyeongho replied that she was a guest, and that guests are fed for free, always. Sori nodded and wrote it down in her black notebook. Sonim. Every evening, for free. The next day, Sonim came. And the next. And the next. Every evening she would sit in a dark corner and eat whatever Gyeongho set before her. She remained silent. Sometimes she would say a single sentence. The saltiness had shifted by 2 notches. Or the acidity was half a degree higher than yesterday. Or the simmering had lasted 4 minutes longer, causing the starch to turn into sugar. Every one of her observations was precise. Each one concerned technique. She neither praised nor criticized. She diagnosed, like a surgeon reading an X-ray. Gyeongho listened and made adjustments. His techniques were from another world. Her observations were from this one. She knew things he didn't. How meridians react to certain herbs. Which minerals in the local water enhance fermentation and which kill it. Why moon deer meat cannot be fried in cast iron because iron binds its essence and turns it into poison. This was the knowledge of the late Master Baek Dong-soo. The lost techniques of this world's heavenly table. The very manuscripts that they weren't burned. They were here, in the mind of an old beggar woman in a dark corner of a low-key tavern. Gyeongho and Sonim didn't talk about it directly. He didn't tell her where he came from. She didn't ask. He cooked. She tasted. She let slip a single phrase. He changed the recipe. It was a language spoken only by chefs, without words, through taste. On the 12th day, Son Nim said something new. She said the boy needed the Seven Valleys herb. That without it, the broth would hit the ceiling of the second star and not break through. That the herb grew in the forest north of Hwaran, and that the forest had been declared a restricted zone by the House of Hwan. Gyeongho asked why it was off-limits. Sonam said it was because everything needed to cook without the House of Hwan grew in that forest. Wild herbs, underground mushrooms, and roots that contained the raw essence of the trio. The guild knew about this forest. It ordered the House of Hwan to block access to it and declare it cursed. Anyone who enters gets shot by the forest patrols. Gyeongho took note. The forest to the north. The grass of the Seven Valleys. For this, he needed someone who knew the forest. He remembered the wounded mercenary with a bandage around his ribs, the one the broth had helped. The mercenary came every third day. His name was Mo Gil-soo, a former hunter-tracker. He'd lost his leg below the knee on a mission a year ago. A 3-star badge. He knew the forests around Hwaran like the back of his hand. And he owed Gyeongho a debt of gratitude for his ribs, which no longer hurt. Gyeongho called for Gil-soo. He sat down with him at the table. He poured him some broth. He asked if he knew the way to the northern forest. Gil-soo set down his bowl. He looked at Gyeongho and said that the boy wanted to die. That there were House Hwan patrols in the forest, 6 men in a trio, crossbows and wolfhounds. Gyeongho said he didn't need to go deep into the forest. He needed the Seven Valleys herb that grew at the edge of the woods. Just go in and come out. Gil-soo was silent. Then he said he knew a path through the ravine. The patrols don't go into the ravine because it's wet there and footprints are visible. But he knows how to walk on water. He asked when. Gyeongho said tomorrow before dawn. Sori was eavesdropping from behind the counter. She came over and said she was coming too. Gyeongho said no. She said that if he didn't come back, who would cook? That she needed to learn to find ingredients on her own. That she wouldn't be a burden. Gyeongho looked at her. 17 years old. Rank 1. Her badge barely glowed. A skinny girl with a black notebook. He said no a second time. She said for the third time that she was going. Gil-soo snorted and said it was safer with her because she was light and didn't crunch the twigs. Gyeongho realized it was useless to argue. He said, "Let's head out on the 4th watch." He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the pots of beans. 10 pots. 10 future sauces. The beans had already begun to change. In a week, the smell would turn sour. In a month, dark. In 3 months, they would turn into a weapon. But tomorrow, he's going into the forbidden forest for the herb he needs today. Time was working against him. Min-jung had cut off the meat supply. The next step would be grain, then oil, then the tavern itself. The Hwang family was tightening the noose, and Gyeongho could feel it. He needed a 3rd star. He needed ingredients that weren't available at the market. He needed the forest. He closed his eyes and thought of Do-hyun. Where was he now? What star did he have? What recipes had he stolen from the book? Gyeongho clenched his fists. His fingers smelled of honey and cast iron. He opened his eyes and began sharpening his knife. The 4th guard shift was in 4 hours. The forest began beyond the ravine, a 3-hour walk north of Hwaran. Gil-soo led the way. His wooden prosthetic leg didn't hinder him from moving over the rocks so quietly that Gyeongho could hear nothing but his own breathing. Sori walked behind Gyeongho, light and as she had promised. Dawn had not yet touched the sky. The stars hung low. The ravine was narrow and wet. The water came up to their ankles. It was cold. Gil-soo led them along rocky outcrops where no footprints remained. They walked through the water for 30 minutes. Then the ravine led to a gentle slope, and Gil-soo raised his hand. Stop. Ahead, a light flickered among the trees. A torch. A patrol. 2 figures with crossbows and a dog on a leash. Gil-soo held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes. The patrol would move on. They waited. Gyeongho counted the seconds and looked at the trees. The forest was different. Not like the groves around Hwaran. The trees were taller, the air was denser, and the smell. Gyeongho could feel it with his whole body. The earth smelled of mushrooms and humus and something else. Sweetish. Alive. Essence. The earth here was saturated with essence. The plants drew it from the soil and stored it in their stems and leaves. That was why the guild had closed off the forest. Something grew here that wasn't available on the market. Free essence. The patrol had disappeared around the bend. Gilsa waved his hand. They moved up the slope. Gyeongho watched his step and counted. Ordinary grass, moss, ferns, roots, mushrooms on a tree trunk. He stopped at every mushroom and sniffed it. No. 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 This one. A fist-sized birch bolete with a white cap and a spongy underside. Not poisonous. Gyeongho picked it. He sniffed the flesh. Essence 40. A raw mushroom contained 40 units of essence. At the Hwaran market, the most expensive ingredient contained 50. This mushroom grew in the mud for free. He picked 3 more. Put them in his bag. They moved on. Gilsu pointed to the bushes on the left. Grass with narrow silvery leaves spread among the roots. The Seven Valleys grass. Sonam was right. It grew at the edge of the forest. Not very deep. Gyeongho dropped to his knees. He touched a leaf. Thin. Cool to the touch. He sniffed it. A minty scent with a hint of iron. He picked a bunch. Squeezed it between his fingers. Juice on his fingertips. He brought it to his nose. The scent changed. It became bitter. Deep. When added to broth, this juice would break through the ceiling of the second star. Sonam had explained that the Seven Valleys herb acts as a catalyst. It doesn't carry the essence itself. It makes the other ingredients yield 3 times as much. A multiplier. Like vinegar, but 10 times more potent. Gyeongho picked 2 bunches. Sori gathered some nearby. He showed her which leaves to pluck and how to twist the stem so as not to break the root. If you leave the root, a new bunch will grow in a month. Don't be greedy. Take only the tops. Sori took it all in. Gilsu stood on the ledge and looked down the slope. Quiet. 7 minutes. They'd gathered enough. Gyeongho climbed up. He nodded to Gilsu. Let's go. They started back toward the ravine. And then a dog barked. Far away, but closer than it should be. The patrol had returned early. Gilsu cursed under his breath. Run, he said. They ran down the slope toward the ravine. Branches whipped against their faces. Gyeongho clutched the bag to his chest. Sori ran silently, keeping up with them. The barking grew closer. The dog had picked up the scent. The smell of mushrooms. The bag stank up the whole forest. Gilsu turned to Gyeongho and told him to drop the bag. Gyeongho said no. Gilsu said the dog was following the scent and that in a minute they'd be caught. And instead of mushrooms, they'd have bullets in their backs. Gyeongho stopped for a second. He opened the bag. He took out a single mushroom. He crushed it in his palm and flung it aside, far to the right. The mushroom flesh scattered among the bushes. The scent hit the air. The dog barked to the right. A decoy. The stinking pulp led the dog away from their trail. They dove into a ravine. The water stung their legs. They ran over the rocks. The barking behind them grew fainter. It went to the right. The patrol ran after the dog, following the false trail. Gilsu led them through the water for another 20 minutes. Then he stopped. He listened. Quiet. They'd gone. They emerged from the ravine wet and gasping for breath. Gyeongho sat down on a rock and opened the bag. 3 mushrooms. 2 bunches of Seven Valleys grass. He'd lost 1 mushroom on the false trail. That was enough. Sori crouched down beside him. She was breathing heavily, but her eyes were ablaze. She said that next time they'd need to bring a second bag for false trails. Gyeongho looked at her and thought that this girl was learning faster than half of his trainees at the White Heron. He told Gilsu that the patrols would be searching for tracks near the ravine, that they couldn't take the same route a second time. They needed a new trail. He knew of 2 more, but they're longer. 6 hours instead of 3. Gyeongho nodded. That's a problem for later. Right now, he has 7 valleys herb and 3 mushrooms. They returned to the tavern around noon. Gyeongho went straight to the kitchen. He brewed the herb in hot water at 72 degrees. Not boiling water. Boiling water kills the catalyst. That's exactly what Sonam had told him. 72 degrees, 3 minutes. Then strain it and add it to the broth. He added the infusion to the pot of bone broth that had been simmering since morning. The broth changed color. It went from golden to a greenish gold. The aroma grew deeper, multi-layered. Gyeongho scooped up a spoonful. He brought it to his nose. He closed his eyes. The plaque above the pot lit up. 3 stars. Essence 780. From bones and herbs. A 3-star dish. The cook gasped and stepped back. She had never seen a 3-star dish in her life. 3-star dishes were served in the Hwan House restaurants for 200 copper coins a serving. Here, the 3-star dish sat in a smoke-stained pot in Fox's kitchen. Fox's kitchen. Gyeongho opened his eyes. 3 stars. His body was a 1. The language tax demanded a taste. A sip of the 3-star would tear his meridians apart. Blood down his throat. Maybe worse. He stood over the pot and thought. 54 essences out of 100. 46 points to the 2nd star. If his body made it to 100 and became a 2-star, then he could try the 3-star without. But the body won't make it in a single day. It takes time, and he needs the broth now. Tissue sat in the hall and waited. 5 others had come with him, all 3 stars. They needed food before a serious contract. The wolf's lair in the south had grown. 5th-rank wolves. 3s against 5s. Without good food, it's suicide. Gyeongho made a decision. He diluted the 3-star broth with regular bone broth at a ratio of 1 to 3. The star dropped. 2.5. 310 essence per serving. That's enough for the 3 stars. And that's enough for a test. He scooped up a spoonful of the diluted broth, brought it to his lips. Hot. Thick. The herb gave it a hint of mint and iron. His body absorbed the shock. His meridians throbbed. They expanded. They contracted. The essence seeped inside like water into a sponge. The display flashed. 54 became 63, then 71. Then it stopped. A gain of 17. He wasn't coughing up blood. His chest ached, but it was bearable. The dilution worked. He could drink his own broth in small doses and grow, slowly. 17 points per serving. But he was growing. Gyeongho carried 6 servings into the hall. Tae-soo and his men ate in silence. 5 groups of 3. The average essence gain was 94 points per serving. One of their counters flickered on the verge of a 4. Tae-soo finished eating and set down his bowl. His hands were shaking. He looked at Gyeongho and said that he used to think the first bowl was a fluke, that he'd gotten lucky. But now he thinks the boy knows something no one else does. Gyeongho replied that he knows how to make broth, and that it was time to go kill wolves. Tae-soo stood up. He slapped him on the shoulder so hard that Gyeongho staggered. He said he'd be back. He left with the squad. Gyeongho rubbed his shoulder. The young cook's body was frail. It was a friendly slap, but his shoulder throbbed. A 1. He was still a 1. 7-1 out of 100. 29 points to the 2nd star. 3 days. Maybe 4, if his body could hold out. That evening, Sonam came by. Gyeongho set a 3-star broth in front of her. Undiluted. She could drink it safely because her meridians were dead. The essence entered and didn't linger. She was like a bucket full of holes. No matter how much you pour in, it all leaks out. But the taste remained. Sonam tasted it. She froze. She was silent for a long time. Then she said that the 7 Valleys herb provided a catalyst, but that the bond with collagen was weak. That fat was needed. Animal fat. And that in the northern forest, underground carp are found in the streams beneath the roots. Carp roe contains fat that binds the essence to the collagen tightly. Gyeongho looked at her. Underground carp roe. Another trip into the forbidden forest. Sonim read his expression and added that the carp are found only deep the depths, not at the edge of the forest, that the patrols were denser there, that Master Beck had gone after the carp alone and returned with blood on his hands. Gyeongho finished his portion. 71 became 78. His body ached, but it held up. He said he would first become a 2, and then he would go after the carp. Sonim nodded and said quietly that there was no need to rush. She'd waited 20 years. She could wait a little longer. On the 14th day, Hwang Min-jung entered the Yellow Fox, in person. Gyeongho was standing by the hearth and sensed him before he saw him. The scent. Silk and sandalwood oil and something else. Metal. Blood. Old blood caked into the leather beneath his gloves. The hall fell silent. The mercenaries at the tables stopped chewing. Sori froze with her tray. The innkeeper pressed himself against the wall. Min-jung walked in like a master, unhurriedly, with a smile. Behind him were 2 guards from the 4th Division, swords at their belts. The emblem above Min-jung glowed with a 5, the 5th star. Essence 890 out of 1,000. 22 years old, the 2nd son of the Hwan house. He was handsome. That was the first thing Gyeongho noticed. A handsome face with soft features, eyes slightly narrowed, like those of a man who smiles even when thinking about how to break someone's finger. Min-jung surveyed the hall. He grimaced. Dirty tables, soot on the walls, mercenaries in patched-up clothes. He walked over to the counter and sat down on the only cushioned chair the owner kept for himself. The guards stood on either side. Min-jung placed his gloves on the counter. The fingers beneath them were white, perfect, not a single callus, not a single scar. He looked at the owner and said he'd come to try the famous cuisine of the dead fox, that the rumors had reached the house of Hwan, that the half-breed kitchen boy supposedly worked wonders with bones and porridge, that he'd become curious. The owner began to tremble. He looked at Gyeongho. Gyeongho came out of the kitchen. He looked at Min-jung. Their eyes met. Min-jung smiled even wider. He said he remembered him, that very same boy who dared to say the master's beef had a bad smell. He said he'd wanted to break the boy's fingers back then, but decided it wasn't worth getting his hands dirty. And now the boy had opened his mouth even wider and was feeding the mercenaries with the very goods he was disrupting Hwan House's shipments of. Min-jung's voice remained soft, pleasant, like honey, but his eyes were glassy. He said he was giving the boy a chance. 1 plate. If the plate was good, the House of Hwan might offer him a contract. If it was bad, the boy would leave Hwaran on his own and forget the name of this city. The hall was silent. Tai-su was not there. He had left on a mission 3 days ago and had not returned. The mercenaries in the hall were 2nd and 3rd-rate fighters. Against 2 4th-rate fighters with swords, they would have been killed in a minute. Gyeongho understood this. And Min-jung understood that Gyeongho understood. This was no chance at all. It was a condition of surrender wrapped in a smile. Gyeongho was silent for 3 seconds. Then he said he would prepare it. He went back to the kitchen. His hands didn't tremble. He thought. The 5th star. Essence 890. Min-jung eats at the best restaurants in the Hwang house every day. His meridians are accustomed to rich, heavy, high-grade food. His channels are wide and coarse, forced open by strength, not technique. You can't pierce through that with bone broth. His body simply wouldn't notice the difference. A different approach was needed. Gyeongho took some peas. He boiled a handful at the exact temperature. He mashed them into a paste. He added a drop of honey, a drop of vinegar, and 3 drops of soy sauce from a forgotten pot. Then he did something he'd never done before. He took a pinch of salt and tossed it onto the red-hot cast iron. The salt sizzled. It smelled like the sea. He gathered the scorched salt and ground it into dust between his fingers. He added it to the paste. Scorched salt. A mineral flavor with a smoky bitterness. This technique worked on people whose meridians had become clogged. The bitterness and the mineral flavor broke through the thick walls of the channels from the inside. Like an abrasive. Like sandpaper on a rusty pipe. Not power, precision. He brought out a small bowl, 1 spoonful of pea paste with a dark drop of sauce on top and a pinch of burnt salt. A plate over the bowl. 2 stars. Essence 240. Minjong looked at the dish and laughed. He said that 1 spoonful was all a half-breed kitchen boy was capable of. The guards snorted. The mercenaries in the hall held their breath. Sori stood by the wall, her fingers clenching the black notebook so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Minjong picked up the spoon, with 2 fingers, casually. He put the paste in his mouth. He chewed. His eyes widened slightly, just a tiny bit. He swallowed. The display above his head flashed. +4. 4 of 5 from a 2's plate, that was normal. 4 points, nothing special. Minjong opened his mouth to say something dismissive, but he didn't, because 3 seconds after the paste reached his stomach, the scorching salt reached his meridians, and it began to work. Minjong flinched. His hand, holding the spoon, froze in midair. His face changed. The smile vanished. His eyes widened. He felt something scraping at his channels from the inside, roughly, methodically. It didn't hurt, but it was unstoppable, as if someone were cleaning a rusty pipe from the inside with a brush. Slag. Years of fatty food had settled on the walls of his meridians like scale. He had never felt this before because all the cooks he knew only added essence. No one cleaned. No one knew it needed cleaning. Burnt salt was cleaning it. The display flashed again. +4 became +11. Then +19. It wasn't essence being added. The slag was being flushed out. The old, clogged-up essence was being released from the walls and flowing back into the stream. Minjong grabbed the edge of the counter. His forehead broke out in a sweat. His fingers turned white. He couldn't stand up. His body was moving of its own accord. The channels were being cleared, and it felt like lancing an old abscess. Painful. Filthy. But afterward, it was easier to breathe. +27. +34. The guards stepped forward. Minjong raised his hand. Stop. He looked at his scorecard. 890 had become 924. 34 points. From a single spoonful of pea paste from a level 1 cook. But it wasn't about the numbers. It was about what he felt. Lightness. Purity. His meridians were breathing. For the first time in years. He looked at Gyeongho. The smile was gone. There was something else. Gyeongho recognized it. He'd seen it 1,000 times in his past life. When a person who spent their whole life eating expensive junk tries real food for the first time. The face sheds its mask. For a second, he becomes a child. For just a second, then the mask returns. Minjong closed his eyes. He opened them. The mask was back. The smile was back. But Gyeongho saw a crack. Minjong stood up. He put on his gloves. He said it was interesting, that the young cook knew a thing or two, that the House of Hwan would be in touch. He turned toward the door. Gyeongho called after him that the salt in his kitchen was cheap, and that was why his gloves smelled like fish. Minjong stopped. His back froze. The guards placed their hands on their swords. The hall held its breath. Minjong turned his head, a half turn, one eye, glassy. He said the boy was insolent, that insolence in Hwaran cost you your fingers, and that he'd remember. He walked out. The guards followed him. The door closed. The hall exhaled. The host slid down the wall onto the floor. Sori ran up to Gyeongho and whispered, asking why he'd provoked him. That now Minjong would definitely return. With people, with fire. Gyeongho looked at her. He said that Minjong would come back anyway, but now he'd come back angry, and an angry enemy makes mistakes. He went back to the kitchen, sat down against the wall. The scoreboard. 78 out of 100. 22 points to the second star. He took out a caramel drop, put it in his mouth. 78 became 83. Another one. 83 became 86. The decline was accelerating. Each subsequent drop gave less. Tomorrow he'd cook some diluted broth and make up the rest. In 2 days, he'd be a 2. and then he could try for threes. Then his growth would accelerate. But Minjung wouldn't wait 2 days. Gyeongho knew that. He had provoked Minjung, on purpose, with that remark about gloves and fish. Because a vicious enemy is in a hurry, and those who are in a hurry send people whose actions can be anticipated. The knife lay nearby. Sharp. Clean. Gyeongho took it in his hand. Not for fighting, for cooking. But in this world, the difference was finer than he thought. Hwang Minjung comes to the Yellow Fox in person. Gyeongho serves him pea paste with roasted salt, which clears blocked meridians. Minjung's gauge jumps 34 points. For a second, the mask slips. Gyeongho deliberately provokes him with a remark about gloves. Minjung leaves with a threat. Gyeongho counts on his bitter enemy to make mistakes. Gyeongho's essence, 86 over 100, 14 points away from the second star. They came at night. Gyeongho hadn't been sleeping. He sat by the pots of beans and listened. The fourth watch, the darkest hour. 3 pairs of footsteps behind the back wall, heavy, leather soles. Not mercenaries. Mercenaries wear soft boots. These were the boots of the Hwan house. Gyeongho stood up. He quietly woke Sori. She was sleeping on sacks in the pantry. Her eyes flew open instantly. She didn't ask any questions. He held up 3 fingers and pointed at the back wall. She nodded. She stood up. She grabbed the black book and a vegetable knife. She went out through the front door into the alley. Gyeongho carried the pots of beans into the cellar, all 10 of them, one by one. Quietly, quickly. The pots were heavy. The young cook's body groaned with the effort. But the pots were more important than anything else in this tavern. 3 months of fermentation, a weapon that could not be lost. He closed the cellar lid. He stuffed it with rags. He returned to the kitchen. The back door shook from the impact. A second blow, a third. The bolt creaked. The door burst open. 3 men, a trio, burly. One held a torch, the second a club. The third carried a jug. Oil. Gyeongho realized they hadn't come to fight. They'd come to set things on fire. The tavern owner ran out of his room. He saw the 3 men. He screamed. The man with the club struck him in the stomach. The owner doubled over and fell. The man with the torch stepped toward the kitchen. Gyeongho stood in front of the hearth, a knife in his hand. A butcher's knife. Not a weapon, but in his hand, it was a tool he'd worked with for 30 years. The man with the torch laughed. He said the young cook was about to cut someone. He stepped closer. Gyeongho didn't move. He was looking at the torch. The fire burned unevenly. The resin crackled. Between him and the torchbearer stood a cast-iron pot with the remains of broth simmering over the coals. It was hot. Gyeongho waited. The man stepped even closer. He swung the torch. Gyeongho kicked the cauldron's support. The cast-iron cauldron swayed and tipped over. Boiling broth gushed onto the torchbearer's legs. The man screamed. The torch fell. Gyeongho grabbed the torch off the floor with his left hand. His right hand gripped the knife. The second man, wielding a club, lunged forward. Gyeongho stepped back behind the table. The club struck the wood. The table split in 2. Gyeongho ducked under the blow and slashed at the man's arm with the knife. Not deep, but it cut through a tendon. He knew the anatomy of the hand better than any surgeon. 30 years of butchering meat. Muscles, tendons, ligaments. He knew where to cut so the hand would lose its grip. The club fell. The man clutched his wrist, blood between his fingers. The third man, holding the jug of oil, backed toward the door. Gyeongho hurled the torch. Not at the man, at the jug. The clay jug shattered. The oil flared up. The fire licked at the third man's hands. He screamed and ran out into the alley. The torchbearer, his legs scalded, crawled toward the door. The man with the slashed hand was retreating. Gyeongho stood in the center of the kitchen with a knife in his hand. 1 against 3. He was alone, the weakest creature in that room. But he knew where to strike. And he knew that boiling broth was more terrifying than a sword. The three crawled outside. Gyeongho stomped out the burning oil. He extinguished the smoldering rag by the wall. The kitchen survived, smoked, with a split table and an overturned pot, but intact. The owner was lying on the floor, moaning. Gyeongho helped him sit up. Nothing serious, a bruised abdomen. Sori ran in through the door. Behind her was Gil-soo, with a stick instead of a crutch. Sori looked around the kitchen. She saw blood on the floor. She looked at Gyeongho. He said the broth had spilled. What a shame. It was good broth. Sori didn't smile. She was looking at the knife in his hand, at the blood on the blade. Then she nodded and went to get some water. Gil-soo said that the three of them would go to the Hwang house and tell them that tomorrow, not 3 but 10 would come, and not with clubs but with swords. Gyeongho knew. He'd pressed Minjung for an answer and gotten one. A quick one. A rude one. An ill-considered one. Just as he'd wanted. 3 dim-witted thugs instead of a quiet poisoner or an arsonist striking when no one's around. Minjung acted in a rage. Rage is a mistake. But rage escalates. Gil-soo was right. The next blow will be stronger. We need protection. We need Tae-soo. Tae-soo returned at dawn, covered in mud, wolf's blood on his jacket, his left arm in a sling, but alive. And with him, 12 mercenaries, all alive, thanks to the caramel drops. Tae-soo walked into the dead fox. He saw a smashed table, charred rags, blood on the floor. He stopped. He looked at Gyeongho. Gyeongho said there had been guests. Tae-soo asked how many. 3. Tae-soo asked if they were alive. Gyeongho said they were alive. Tae-soo nodded. He went out onto the street. He called his men. 12 mercenaries entered the tavern. Tae-soo said that starting today, the dead fox would have a security detail. That anyone who entered at night without an invitation would leave without teeth. That this was not a favor, but a duty. That a man who saved 12 lives with caramel drops has the right to 12 swords at his door. The tavern owner began to cry. Not out of fear, out of relief. Sori wrote it down. 12 names, 12 ranks, 12 swords. Gyeongho nodded to Tae-soo. He went to the kitchen. He took the pots out of the cellar. All 10 were intact. The beans were fermenting. The smell had turned sour. In 2.5 months, there would be sauce here. He put the pots back in their place. He cooked a new broth. He added herbs. He diluted it. He drank it. 86 became 91. Another sip. 91 became 94. One more. 94 became 96. 3 points. The decline was brutal. His body resisted. His meridians were at their limit. 4 points to 100. 4 points to the second star. He couldn't reach them today. His body couldn't take another drop. Tomorrow. Gyeongho lay down on the kitchen floor. He closed his eyes. He thought about Minjun, about how his mask had cracked for a second from a single spoonful of pasta, about how Minjun now knew that Gyeongho was dangerous, not as a fighter, as a chef. A chef who clears the meridians of the 5th star with a single spoon is no novice. He's a threat. Minjun will escalate things, not on his own. He'll call his older brother, or the guild, or someone worse. Gyeongho clenched his fists in the darkness. 4 points. Tomorrow he'll become a 2, and then the real war will begin. For now, the knife lay nearby, clean, sharp, smelling of blood he hadn't had time to wash off. In the morning, Gyeongho drank his last portion of diluted broth. His body took the essence with difficulty, like a sponge that's already wet and doesn't want any more water. His meridians creaked. Every channel was stretched to its limit. 96 became 97. He waited an hour. His body stabilized. He took another sip. 97 became 98. Another hour. Another sip. 98 became 99. 1 point. He stood in the dead fox's kitchen and looked at his scorecard. 99 out of 100. 1 point away from the second star. and his body was giving out. His meridians closed tight as a fist. Not a drop more. The barrier. Sonam had mentioned it last night. There's a barrier between every star. A wall of compressed essence that doesn't let anything through until the body readjusts. All mages on this continent broke through the barrier the same way. They ate a lot. They ate expensive food. They stuffed themselves with essence day after day, week after week, until the barrier gave in under the pressure. Brute force. Months of work. Sonam said that Master Pak broke through barriers differently. Not with pressure, but with precision. A single dish. One combination of flavors, tailored to a specific barrier in a specific body. A key, not a battering ram. Gyeongho stood there thinking. His barrier. His body. He knew his meridians by touch. He could feel every channel. The main channel ran from his abdomen upward through his chest to his throat. It was the narrowest. The throat For the young cook So Gyeongho, the throat channel had been constricted since birth. Half-blood. Mixed blood. His throat channel was already 1/3 narrower than normal. That was why the tax of the tongue hit him so hard. Every sip passed through his narrow throat and pressed against its walls. He needed to widen his throat channel. With a single dish. With a single flavor. Acid widens it. He knew that. But the acid affected all the passages equally. He needed to direct the impact precisely at his throat. Only at his throat. Gyeongho closed his eyes. Recipes floated through his mind. Hundreds. Thousands. From 2 lives. From 2 worlds. What flavor strikes the throat? What flavor forces the esophagus to open? And he found it. Ginger. Fresh ginger. A burning root that strikes not the stomach but the throat. Anyone who's chewed raw ginger knows that burning sensation. It starts on the tongue and travels down the throat. Fire. Directed. Precise. Ginger existed in this world. It was used in cold remedies. It cost a cheap. No one knew that, when processed in a certain way, ginger becomes a targeted catalyst. Gyeongho sent Sori to the market. She returned an hour later with a ginger root. 3 copper coins. Gyeongho took the root, peeled it, sliced it into thin rounds. Each slice was 1.5 millimeters thick. Not thicker. If thinner, the essence would be released during processing. If thicker, the burning sensation would be too harsh. He placed them on a dry cast iron pan. The temperature was 88 degrees. Not hot, just drying. Water slowly seeped out of the ginger, concentrating the gingerol, the substance that causes the burning sensation. In a past life, it was chemistry. Here, it was the essence. Concentrated. Directed into the throat. After 3 minutes, the mugs became translucent, golden. The smell was so strong it brought tears to her eyes. The cook sneezed and left. Gyeongho removed the mugs from the cast iron. He placed them on a spoon. 3 mugs. He dripped in some honey, a drop of vinegar. The ginger burns the throat. The honey coats the walls and prevents the burning sensation from spreading to other passages. The vinegar locks the essence in place at the point of contact. 3 ingredients. 3 copper coins. The dye over the spoon. 1 star. Essence 54. Not much. But he doesn't need much. He needs it to be precise. He opened his mouth, placed the spoon on his tongue, swallowed. The burning sensation struck his throat like a fist. Not in his stomach. Not in his chest. In his throat. Right in the throat meridian. The essence entered like a red-hot needle. The throat channel constricted. Then it trembled. Then it began to expand. The pain was sharp, pure, like the crack of a dislocated joint being set. Gyeongho clenched his teeth. He didn't scream. Sweat streamed down his face. His body shook. The throat channel expanded millimeter by millimeter. The walls stretched. The barrier trembled. The display flickered. 99, 99, 99. Then there was a crack. Not a bone, not a muscle. Something invisible inside. The barrier. It snapped like plastic wrap. The essence surged through the throat canal and down his body. All the meridians opened simultaneously. Gyeongho's body flared with heat. The sweat dried instantly. The air around him quivered. The dial clicked. 1 became 2. Taste star 2. Essence 4 out of 200. A new rank. A new ceiling. He stood in the kitchen, breathing. His body felt different. Not stronger, but denser. The channels had widened. The essence flowed more freely. His hands had stopped trembling. For the first time in 2 weeks, his hands weren't shaking. Sori stood in the doorway. She saw his badge. She saw the 1 turn into a 2. Her eyes were wet. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. Gyeongho wiped his face. He looked at his hands. Firm. Warm. Now he could try 3-star dishes without breaking down. He could cook 3-star meals without dying with every bite. He could grow 3 times faster. A 2. In this world, a 2 was the rank of a peasant who eats normally. An insignificant rank. A boy. But Gyeongho knew the value of every point. Every point had cost him blood. Every point had been won with a knife and cast iron, and with a precision this world had never known. He stepped out into the hall. The mercenaries saw his badge and began to buzz. A 2. Their cook had become a 2. Tai-su raised his mug. He didn't say much, but it would do for a start. Gyeongho didn't smile. He looked out the window. A man was standing on the street across from the tavern. Unremarkable. Dressed like a small-time merchant. But Gyeongho had seen him for the 2nd day in a row. In the exact same spot. In the exact same posture. A watcher. Hwan's men were keeping tabs on the dead fox. Counting people. Counting ranks. Compiling a list. Gyeongho turned away from the window. He walked over to Sori. He whispered that there was a spy standing across the street. That he'd been there since yesterday. That everything happening in the tavern was being reported to Min-jun. Sori nodded. She said she knew. That she'd written him down in the black book 2 days ago. The 3rd merchant from Blacksmith Street, rank 2. He goes to Hwan's butcher shop every morning. Gyeongho looked at her. This girl noticed things he missed. She saw people. He saw food. Together they saw everything. He told her not to touch the informant. Let him watch. Let him report. Min-jung needs to know that Gyeongho is now a 2. He must know that the tavern is growing. He must know that 12 mercenaries are standing at the door. Let him get angry. Let him rush. Let him make his next mistake. Sori asked, what if the next mistake isn't thugs with clubs, but something worse? Gyeongho was silent for a moment. Then he said that Sun-nim had mentioned that the House of Hwan uses poisoners. That poison in this world works through essence. A poisoned dish looks like an ordinary but carries reverse essence. It doesn't fill the meridians, it corrodes them. Slowly, imperceptibly. The victim eats and grows weaker for weeks until the channels collapse. Sori turned pale. She asked how to defend herself. Gyeongho said there was only one way. The nose. The reverse essence has a smell, barely perceptible, on the very edge of perception, like a copper coin at the bottom of a clear well. Sonim had been teaching him to distinguish this scent for the past 3 evenings. He wasn't yet sure he could do it, but he was learning. He returned to the kitchen. He took out the pots. He checked each one. The beans were fermenting. 2 weeks. In 10 weeks, he'd have the sauce. In 10 weeks, he'd have a weapon against which neither a monopoly, nor poison, nor an army could stand. But 10 weeks is a lifetime in Hwaran, and Min-jung wasn't going to wait. That evening, Son-nim came by. She tasted the broth. She said the boy had become a 2. That she could tell by the taste. The dish had become a bit more precise. The chef's range had broadened, and his touch had grown firmer. Gyeongho nodded. He asked her about the poisoners. She fell silent. Then she said quietly that the guild's poisoners work through the cooks. They don't slip poison into the food. They replace the cook. They come disguised as traveling chefs. They ask to be led into the kitchen. They cook alongside the victim. They mix in the reverse essence during the process. The victim doesn't know they're eating poisoned food because they didn't prepare that part of the dish. Gyeongho heard and understood. Min-jung won't send a thug again. He'll send a cook. Someone who will ask to come into the kitchen. Someone who would seem helpful, friendly, necessary. Just as Do-yeon once seemed helpful, friendly, and necessary. Gyeongho gripped the knife. He said one sentence quietly, that no one would enter his kitchen without his permission. No one. Sun-nim nodded. She finished her broth and left. Gyeongho sat alone. He stared at the fire in the hearth. A 2. He was a 2, and Min-jung was a 5, a gap of 3 stars. 3 abysses. But the abyss between a cook and an aristocrat wasn't measured in stars. It was measured by who feeds whom.
Gyeongho overcomes the barrier of the second star through ginger, honey, and vinegar, precisely expanding the throat meridian. He becomes a 2-star chef with an essence of 4/200. He spots a spy from the Hwan house near the tavern. Sonam warns him about the guild's poisoners, who operate by replacing the chef. Gyeongho forbids anyone from entering the kitchen without his permission. He expects Min-jung to send not a thug, but a chef poisoner. The chef arrived on the 3rd day after Gyeongho became a level 2. Young, friendly, clean hands, a 3rd-rank chef's badge. He introduced himself as Jeon Uho. He said he was traveling from tavern to tavern looking for work, that he'd heard of the dead fox, that he wanted to learn. He smiled broadly. Too broadly. Gyeongho stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him. Clean hands, not a single burn, not a single callus from a knife, not a single yellow oil stain under his fingernails. A 3rd-class cook wandering from tavern to tavern with hands like a scribe's. Gyeongho inhaled, deeply, through his nose. The scent. Soap. Sandalwood. And beneath that, barely perceptible, like a copper coin at the bottom of a clean well, the reverse essence. Sonam had taught him about it for 3 evenings. Now he knew. That scent was hidden beneath the skin, in the pores, in the saliva. A person who carries the reverse essence in their body smells of copper. Always. Chon Uho smelled of copper. Gyeongho's expression didn't change. He said there was a spot available, that he could start by peeling vegetables. Uho smiled even wider and bowed. Sori stood behind the counter and watched. Gyeongho caught her gaze. He tilted his head slightly to the left. That was their signal. Write it down. Watch. Don't interfere. Sori nodded and opened her black notebook. Uho got to work. He peeled turnips. He washed pots. He brought coal. He did everything he was asked to do. He smiled. He helped out. On the 2nd day, he asked if he could chop onions for the porridge. Gyeongho gave his permission. He stood nearby and watched. Uho chopped. Crookedly. Unevenly. Pieces of varying thickness. Not a cook. Not even close to a cook. The C on his uniform had been bought, filled with expensive food from the Hwan house. A strong body but empty hands. But Gyeongho didn't let on. He waited. On the 3rd day, Uho began adding ingredients to the communal pot. A pinch of salt. A handful of herbs. Trifles. Each time he asked for permission. Each time Gyeongho nodded. And each time, after Uho turned away, Gyeongho sniffed the pot. The 1st day, clean. The 2nd day, clean. Uho was building trust. Patiently, professionally. The guild's poisoner knew his craft. On the 4th day, Sori approached Gyeongho in the evening. She showed him the black book. She had been watching Uho outside the tavern. Every morning he would go to the market and stop by the spice shop on Blacksmith Street. The shop belonged to a merchant who paid rent to the Hwan house. Uho would enter through the back door and exit through the front. He'd stay inside for 10 minutes, every day. Gyeongho nodded and told Sori to keep watching. 2 more days. On the 6th day, Uho asked to help with the broth. He said he'd seen Gyeongho cooking it and wanted to learn. Gyeongho said the broth was his, that he wouldn't let anyone near the pot of broth. Uho smiled and said he understood. He apologized. He backed off. But Gyeongho saw his eyes. Uho hadn't backed off. He just regrouped. That evening,
Gyeongho was cooking pea porridge for the hall.
Uho stood by the wall, peeling carrots.
Gyeongho turned toward the hearth for 3 seconds. Then he turned back. Uho was standing in the same spot, a carrot in his hand, a smile on his face. But the smell in the kitchen had changed. Barely. Copper. Gyeongho walked over to the pot of porridge. He leaned in. He sniffed. Copper. Faint, subtle, like a thread in a haystack. But it was there, the reverse essence. Uho had sprinkled it in while Gyeongho had his back turned. 3 seconds. That was enough. Gyeongho straightened up. He looked at Uho. Uho was smiling. He didn't know he'd been found out. He couldn't have known. Not a single cook on this continent could distinguish reverse essence by its scent. Not a single one except the disciples of the heavenly table. Gyeongho picked up the pot of porridge, carried it out into the hall, walked up to the door, opened it, poured the porridge into the drain, the whole pot, right in front of Uho, right in front of the entire hall. The mercenaries began to murmur. The innkeeper gasped. Uho stopped smiling. Gyeongho set the empty pot on the counter. He turned to Uho. He said one sentence, that the porridge was too salty. Uho blinked. Uho.
He opened his mouth,
Then closed it. Gyeongho stepped closer to him, very close. He said quietly that he knew, that he could sense the copper, that if Uho didn't leave right now, he would tell every mercenary in that room that someone had just tried to poison their porridge with reverse essence, and that Uho wouldn't make it to the door. Uho turned pale. The smile vanished completely. Beneath it was a face that Gyeongho recognized, the face of an executor. Empty, frightened. Uho took off his apron. He laid it on the table. He walked out. He didn't look back. Taisu watched him go from behind the table. He asked what had happened. Gyeongho replied that the porridge was too salty and that the new cook had been fired. Taisu snorted. He didn't believe it. But he didn't ask any further. Sori came over that night. She asked if Min-jung would be sending more. Gyeongho said he would. That the poisoner was the first move. The second would be harder. The third, even harder. The Hwang family wouldn't stop as long as the tavern stood. Sori asked what to do. Gyeongho said they had to stop defending themselves, that defense wouldn't save them, that they had to attack.
She asked how a second-rate cook could take on a 5-star establishment.
Gyeongho replied, "Not with my fists, with my reputation." He explained that the culinary chamber's inspection was coming to Hwadon in 3 weeks. Once a year, an inspector visits the city's taverns and awards official stars to the establishments. An establishment's star is not the same as a dish's star. It's a status, a license, the right to serve food of a certain rank. The Dead Fox didn't have a single star, an unrated hole in the wall. If it received its first star, it would be a blow to the House of Hwan. Because a star is official recognition, a document with a seal. It can't be taken away through bribery. It can't be burned. It's entered into the chamber's registry and remains there as long as the tavern is in business. The House of Hwan controlled all of Hwadon's starred establishments through their meat supplies. A tavern without their meat getting a star on beans and turnips? That's a precedent. It's a scandal. It's the beginning of the end of the monopoly. Sori listened. Then she said that the Hwadon inspector was appointed by the House of Hwan, that he assigns ratings on command, that there hasn't been an honest inspection in years. Gyeongho nodded. He said he knew. He said he didn't need a fair inspection. He needed an inspection the inspector couldn't refuse. A dish that would bring the inspector to his knees in front of 10 witnesses, in public, in full view of the audience. If he gave it the highest rating and the entire audience saw why, then not even the House of Hwan would overturn the result. For that, he needed a 3-star dish, pure, undiluted, and he had to be able to taste it. The tax of the tongue. He's a C. He'll scrape by with a B, but it's touch and go. Sonam was sitting in the corner that evening and heard everything. When Sori left, the old woman approached Gyeongho and said that the boy was thinking correctly, that the inspection is a battle, and that for a battle, one must prepare not only the dish but also the body. She handed him a handful of dried roots, dark, knotty, smelling of earth. She said it was moonflower root, that Master Beck chewed it before every breakthrough. The root doesn't yield essence. It strengthens the walls of the meridians. It makes them more elastic. The body can endure more. Gyeongho took the roots. He sniffed them. A bitter smell. Earthy. No essence. A pure structural fortifier. He put the root in his mouth and began to chew. Bitter. Astringent. His tongue went numb. But after an hour, the meridians felt softer. Not wider. Softer. Like skin after oil. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until the inspection. 3 weeks to prepare a dish that would put the dead fox on the map. 3 weeks for Min Jung to realize that the half-blood apprentice chef had come not to survive, but to win. For 3 weeks, Gyeongho didn't leave the kitchen. In the morning, he chewed moonflower root. He prepared meals for the dining room. In the evening, he experimented. At night, he ate his own dishes by the mouthful and grew. The essence crept upward. 4 out of 200. 18. 34. 57. A little bit every day. His body accepted it more and more easily. The moonflower root was doing its job. The meridians were softening. The walls became elastic. The essence entered without a grind. On the 10th day, he surpassed 100 out of 200, halfway to the 3-star level. On the 15th, he reached 140. His body stopped aching from the 3-star dishes. He could try a 3-star dish in its entirety, not just a mouthful. This whole portion. No blood, no rupture. A 2-star dish with meridians as elastic as those of a 3-star dish. A monstrosity, an anomaly. Not a single textbook in this world describes such a thing. A 2-star dish wasn't supposed to withstand a 3-star dish. But the moonflower root and precise cultivation made the impossible possible. Sori kept a record. The black book had doubled in size. Every client, every dish, every point of growth. She began to see patterns that Gyeongho confirmed. Mercenaries with severe injuries responded better to the broth. Scouts with fast metabolisms did better on caramel drops. Mages who wandered in from nearby villages grew 3 times faster on pea sauce than warriors did. The 4 types of eaters that Gyeongho had identified in the first week had turned into 8, then to 12. Sori systematized it. Gyeongho cooked. Between them, a system took shape that no restaurant in this world could replicate. Personalized cuisine. A plate for each person. Mo Gil-soo went into the forest twice in 3 weeks, along new trails. He brought back mushrooms, 7 Valleys herb, mountain horseradish roots. Sonny specified the ingredients. Gil-soo gathered them. Gyeongho cooked. Sori served. The team worked as a single organism. The tavern owner stepped aside. He no longer gave orders. He poured beer, counted copper coins, and kept to himself. The tavern's revenue increased 8-fold in 3 weeks. 200 copper coins a day. Then 300. Then 500. Mercenaries came from neighboring towns. Rumors spread. That tavern on the outskirts where they make 3s out of 2s and clean the dross from 4s with a single spoon. On the 17th day, a man arrived whom Gyeongho hadn't expected. An old man in plain clothes, a faded cloak, worn-out boots, a 7-star badge. A 7. Gyeongho saw the badge and froze. A 7 at the dead fox. It was like a minister walking into a roadside diner. The room noticed him too. The mercenaries fell silent. Tae-soo placed his hand on his sword. The 7 could have killed everyone in that room with a single glance. The old man sat down at the table. He removed his hood. His face was gaunt. His wrinkles were deep. A monocle hung from a cord. He looked at Gyeongho and said his name was Chang Iju, that he was the dean of the Mana department at the Royal Academy, that he had come from the capital because a report had reached the academy about a tavern in Hwaran that raised its customers' ranks at a rate not recorded in any textbook, and that he wanted to try it for himself. The room fell silent. An academy professor, a 7, a dean, a man who had trained the mages who, in turn, had trained the captains who commanded armies. Gyeongho didn't flinch. He knew this moment. In his past life, he had lived through it hundreds of times. When a critic walked into the restaurant, when the stakes rose to the ceiling, when a single plate decided the fate of the establishment, he returned to the kitchen, closed the door, thought, the 7. An essence worth 10,000. Meridians as wide as rivers. This man had dined at court. The kingdom's finest chefs had cooked for him. 5-star dishes made from rare ingredients costing thousands of gold pieces. His palate was refined, overloaded, clogged with years of expensive, complex food. Rich, heavy, layered. You can't break through that with sheer power. You need simplicity, purity, a flavor this man had never experienced. Because all the chefs in the kingdom had tried to impress him, and not a single one had tried to purify him. Gyeongho took some chicken bones, the cheapest ones, the kind the butcher gave away for free. He chopped them up, covered them with water, set them over low heat, 87 degrees. This broth had been simmering since morning, 16 hours now. Golden, clear. He strained it. He added an infusion of 7 Valleys herbs, 3 drops of 3-month-old soy sauce from the first pot. The first pot had matured 2 days earlier. The sauce was young, sharp, but alive. 1 drop of honey, a pinch of burnt salt. And the final touch? The finishing touch. Gyeongho took a lemon peel. Not a lemon. A citrus fruit that grew at the Hwaran market and which everyone considered inedible. Sour, bitter, good only for cleaning copper cookware. But Gyeongho knew that at 72 degrees, the citrus zest releases an oil that binds all the flavors together in a single burst. Resonance. Acidity plus fat plus umami plus bitterness. 4 vectors, simultaneously. He sliced off the thinnest strip of zest. He dipped it into the broth for 3 seconds. He removed it. The plate above the bowl lit up. 3 stars. Essence 940. From chicken bones. From free bones. Gyeongho carried the bowl into the dining room. He placed it in front of Professor Chang Yi-ju. Broth in a simple earthenware bowl, golden with a greenish tinge. The aroma was subtle, not overpowering. Subtle. The professor lifted the bowl. He sniffed. His eyebrows twitched. He took a sip. Just one. He set the bowl down. His hand froze. His monocle slipped off its cord and hung against his chest. The professor's eyes widened. He stared into space. The display above his head flickered. For the 7, the increase was minimal. +2. Negligible. But the professor wasn't looking at the display. He was looking inward. Something was happening within him that the numbers didn't show. Burnt salt cleansed. The herb expanded. The sauce guided. The zest bound. 4 effects at once. The 7's meridians, which had been clogged for 70 years by court cuisine, began to clear. Not from potency, from precision. The professor quietly remarked that he had been eating for 70 years, that he hadn't known food could do this, that it was impossible, that this was 3 stars made from chicken bones. His voice was dry. His throat went dry. He finished the broth. He set down the bowl. He stood up. He bowed, not just a nod, but a full bow. The dean of the Royal Academy bowed before a second-rate cook in an unrated tavern on the outskirts of Hwaran. The room fell silent. Tai-su dropped his mug. Sori stopped writing. The mercenaries watched, unable to believe their eyes. The professor straightened up. He gave Gyeongho a long look. He said he would return, that the boy had a patron if he wanted one. He pulled up his hood and walked out. Gyeongho stood there, watching him go. Then he returned to the kitchen. He sat down against the wall. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from tension. A 3-star dish made from free bones. He'd done it. And the 7 bowed. The inspection was in 4 days. He was ready. Min-jung wasn't. The day of the inspection began with rain. A gray sky over Hwaran,
puddles on the cobblestones. The dead fox had been packed since dawn. Tai-su and his 12 stood at the door. Inside sat the mercenaries, 30 men, all regulars. All had come uninvited. Rumors had spread throughout the city. An inspection at the dead fox. The unrated tavern is being evaluated. Some came to watch, some to show support, some to gloat. Gyeongho stood in the kitchen checking the ingredients. Bones, 16-hour broth, 7 Valleys herb, 3-month-old soy sauce from the first pot, honey, charred salt, zest. Everything was in place. Everything had been double-checked. Sori stood by the door to the dining room, watching. At noon, 4 people entered the tavern. The inspector from the culinary chamber, a short, fat man with a 4 badge and a scroll of parchment under his arm. Behind him were 2 clerks, and the 4th. Gyeongho saw the 4th man and gripped his knife. Hwang Min-jung, dressed in silk, wearing gloves, smiling. He had come in person to watch as the inspector gave a 0 rating and shut down the tavern. Because the inspector was his man. Min-jung sat down in the front row. He folded his arms. He looked at Gyeongho across the hall. He smiled. Gyeongho didn't respond. He was looking at the inspector, a fat man with sweaty hands and shifty eyes. Number 4. A bureaucrat bought off by the Hwang house. His evaluation decided everything. The inspector sat down at a separate table. He unrolled the scroll. He said that, according to protocol, the tavern was required to serve 3 dishes, 1 from each listed category. Since the Drunken Fox has no stars, it serves from the basic category. If a dish earns a minimum 2-star rating on the chamber's scale, a star is awarded, a formality. Everyone knew that the inspector could give any rating, and that Min-jung was sitting in the front row for a reason. Gyeongho returned to the kitchen. The first dish, pea porridge with caramelized onions and soy sauce. The dead fox's standard dish. He could have prepared it with his eyes closed. Temperature, time, salt, a drop of sauce. He brought it out. The inspector tasted it. His expression didn't change. He wrote a number on the scroll. He didn't show it. Second course, broth with 7 Valleys herb. Golden. Clear. The aroma filled the hall. The mercenaries at the tables looked up. The inspector tasted it. His eyes widened slightly. But he quickly hid his reaction. He wrote it down. Min-jung watched calmly. His smile didn't waver. He knew the inspector would write down a 0 no matter what was on the plate. Third course. Gyeongho stood in the kitchen, examining the ingredients. Bones, sauce, herbs, zest. He could have recreated the professor's broth, a 3-star dish. But that wasn't enough. The inspector wrote a 0. Min-jung would leave with a smile. The tavern would be left without a star. He needed something else. Not a dish for the inspector, a dish for the dining room. For the 30 people sitting and watching. For Tai-su by the door. For Sori behind the counter. For the town. A dish you simply couldn't refuse. Not because it was delicious, because your body wouldn't let you. Gyeongho took a pot out of the cellar. Not the first one, the second one. The one he'd set aside to ferment during the first week and that had matured last night. 3 months. The sauce was dark, thick. The aroma wafted through the clay. He lifted the lid, brought it to his nose. He closed his eyes. For 20 years in his past life, he'd worked with soy sauce. He knew every nuance. This sauce was rough, young, but it had a depth that no court chef could ever create because none of them knew the word fermentation. He took an egg, a quail egg, small, cheap, 3 kopecks a dozen at the market. He boiled it. Not hard-boiled, not soft-boiled. 63 degrees, 45 minutes. Exactly. The yolk turned creamy. The white remained tender. 94% of the egg's essence was preserved. With normal cooking, only 11% remained. He placed the egg on a spoon. 1 spoonful of the 3-month-old sauce on top. A drop of sesame oil. He'd pressed the oil from the seeds by hand 3 days ago because the store-bought kind had gone rancid. And one last thing, the zest. A wafer-thin strip.
into the oil for 3 seconds. He took it out. The display above the spoon lit up and began to flash. The numbers climbed. 3 stars. Then they wavered. 3 became 4. 4 stars. From a quail egg. Gyeongho stepped back. A 4. He hadn't expected a 4. The 3-month-old sauce produced a surge that the 1-week-old version hadn't. Fermentation had multiplied the glutamate 20-fold. The resonance of 4 vectors on this foundation broke through the 3-star ceiling. 4 stars. Cost? 3 kopecks. The language tax. He had to try it. A 4. He's a 2. With the elastic meridians of a 3. He could handle a 3. A 4. He didn't know. The moonflower root had strengthened the walls.
But a 4 is a 4. Gyeongho looked at the egg, then at the hall beyond the door, at the inspector with sweaty hands, at Min-jun in silk. He picked up a spoon, bit off a quarter of the egg. The sauce touched his tongue. The world exploded. The essence surged into his throat like a river that had burst its banks. His meridians howled. The walls stretched to their limit. Further, even further. Pain shot through his body from his throat to his toes. Gyeongho fell to one knee. He clenched his teeth. Blood. He tasted blood in his mouth. The walls of his throat developed a micro crack. Not a tear, a crack. He spat, a red drop on the floor. He stood up. The display flashed. 140 became 168, then 189, then 200. The barrier. The wall between 2 and 3. The essence pressed against the barrier. He pressed back. The pressure mounted. Gyeongho clenched his teeth so hard his jaw cracked. The barrier burst. The plate clicked. 2 became 3. The 3rd star. In the dead fox's kitchen, from a quail egg with soy sauce. He straightened up, wiped the blood from his lips. His hands were shaking. But the plate was glowing with a 3, and the dish on the spoon was glowing with a 4. He was ready to serve. Gyeongho carried the spoon out into the dining room. 1 spoon, 1 egg. He set it down in front of the inspector. The dining room fell silent. The inspector looked at the spoon. The flame above it burned at a 4. A 4-star dish. On the spoon. A quail egg. The inspector turned pale. He'd seen 4-star dishes at the Hwan House restaurants, made from griffin meat, dragon liver, and ingredients costing tens of thousands of gold. Here, the 4-star dish lay on a wooden spoon and smelled of something that made his mouth water against his will. Min-jun stopped smiling. He recognized the mark. A 4. He stood up. He said loudly that it was a forgery, that the half-blood kitchen boy had mixed something in, that the chamber should investigate. Gyeongho didn't look at him. He looked at the inspector. He said, "Try it." The inspector took a spoon. His hand was shaking. He put the egg in his mouth. He chewed. His eyes rolled back. The plate above him flashed. A 4 wouldn't be triggered by a single spoonful, but plus 47 essences coursed through his meridians like a hot wind through an open window. The inspector dropped the spoon. He grabbed the edge of the table. His body was shaking. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He was crying. Not out of sadness, because of the taste. Because his body was doing something he hadn't asked for. 30 people in the hall saw it. They saw the 4's emblem. They saw the inspector in tears. They saw the quail egg on the wooden spoon. Min-jun stood there, pale. He clenched his gloves. With a trembling hand, the inspector unrolled the scroll. He dipped his brush. He wrote, a star. 1 star. He had wanted to write a 0. His hand wrote a star. Because 30 people were watching. Because the 4 stencil hung in the air. Because his own body had just betrayed its master. Min-jun turned and walked out. The door slammed. The hall erupted. The mercenaries were shouting and banging their mugs. Tissu was laughing so hard the walls shook. Sori stood behind the counter, crying and taking notes at the same time. The owner sat on the floor, staring at the scroll with the seal. 1 star. Dead Fox had earned a star.
the first unrated establishment in Hwaran to become a star-rated one in 12 years. On beans, turnips, and a quail egg. Gyeongho stood in the center of the hall.
A size 3 shirt. Blood on his lips. Blood under his fingernails from clenching his fists in the kitchen. He wasn't smiling. He was thinking about how Min Jung had just left. About how, in an hour, the House of Hwan would know. About how, in a day, the capital would know. And about how, somewhere in this world, Lee Do-hyun would hear the name So Kyung-ho and remember a taste that shouldn't exist. The news spread like wildfire within a day. The tavern on the outskirts had earned a star. A 4-star dish made from quail eggs. A chef who had been a 2-star chef just a week ago. Cost price, 3 copper coins. The trading houses did the math and couldn't believe it. The Hwan House restaurant served 4-star dishes made from griffin meat for 80,000 gold pieces. Here, a 4-star dish cost 3 copper coins. If this were true, the entire pricing structure would collapse. If anyone could take a quail egg and make a 4-star dish, why pay 80,000 for a griffin? The Hwan House understood this. Min Jung understood this. And Hwan Seong-woo, the eldest brother, understood this as well. Seong-woo arrived in Hwaran 2 days after the inspection.
Gyeongho learned of this from Sori. She had seen a carriage bearing the Hwan House crest at the estate gates. Seong-woo was different. Number 7. The eldest son. A cold, calculating heir. He didn't break fingers or send thugs. He thought. And after he thought, he did 3 things. First, he publicly announced that the Hwan family had no claims against the dead fox. That he congratulated Chief So Ji-hyo on receiving his star. That competition was good for Hwaran. A smile. A bow. The newspapers. Second, he sent a messenger to the capital with a sealed letter for the Silver Spoon Guild. Gyeongho didn't know the contents of the letter, but Sun Nim did. She arrived that evening, her face ashen. She took that the guild would receive the letter in 3 days. That the letter contained So Gyeongho's name and a description of his techniques. That the guild keeps a registry of every chef on the continent rated higher than a 3. That a chef who makes 4s out of eggs ends up not on the registry but on the blacklist. That the blacklist means only one thing, a hunt. Gyeongho listened and said nothing. Then he asked how much time he had.
So Nim said that the guild would send an appraiser in a week.
If the appraiser confirmed it, the hunters would come in a month. If Gyeongho wasn't stronger than a 5 by then, they'll find him. They'll cut out his tongue, burn his meridians, throw him into the river. Just like Master Beck 20 years ago. The third thing Seong-woo did was challenge Gyeongho to the Hwaran culinary tournament. Not in person, through Min Jung. A formal challenge according to chamber protocol. Refusal meant the loss of a star. The tournament was in 10 days. An open arena. A public battle of chefs. Min Jung fields the court chef of the Hwan House, a 6-star chef, against Gyeongho, a 3-star chef. The stakes? The license to supply food to the Royal Academy of Magic. If Gyeongho wins, he gets a contract that feeds the academy for a year. If he loses, the drunken fox loses its star and closes down. Gyeongho accepted the challenge on the spot. 10 days. He needed to rise from a 3-star to a level that would allow him to create a dish capable of beating a 6-star. Not to become a 6-star himself. To create a 6-star dish using ingredients bought with coins.
He'd done it before, a 4-star dish from an egg.
But a 6-star was a different level. Each stars didn't add up, they multiplied. The difference between a 4 and a 6 was like that between a stream and a river. Sunny sat in her corner and watched him. She said there was a way. That Master Pak, before his death, had developed a technique he hadn't had time to use. The final recipe. A dish made from a single ingredient, enhanced by pure fermentation to a level that breaks the scale. But for this, you need an ingredient that isn't available on the market. The roe of the underground carp. From the forbidden forest. From the depths. Gyeongho looked at Gil-soo. Gil-soo looked at him. He said that deep in the forest, patrols in groups of 4. All the 4s. Dogs. Traps. One false step and an arrow in the throat. Gyeongho said he needed 1 fish. Just 1. Gil-soo was silent. Then he said he knew a stream, deep in the woods, 6 hours from the ravine. A patrol passes every 2 hours, a 40-minute window. Go in, catch it, get out. If they're lucky. If not, they'll be found in a week, with their tongues cut out. Tae-soo said he was coming. Gil-soo leads the way. Tae-soo provides cover.
Gyeongho catches the fish.
Sori said she was coming too. Gyeongho said no. She said someone had to carry the bag while he fished, that his hands had to be free for the fish, that she was the lightest and quietest of them all. Gyeongho looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. The four of them set out the rotating guard. The journey took 9 hours. Across a ravine, through the forest, past the first ring of patrols. Gil-soo led the way along detour paths. Tae-soo brought up the rear with his sword drawn. The forest grew denser, darker. The trees were taller. The ground was softer. The scent of the essence was so thick that Gyeongho's head was spinning. This forest was a living repository. The guild had sealed it off not because it was dangerous here, but because everything was here. They found a stream around noon. Narrow, cold, clear water over a rocky bottom. Gil-soo pointed to the shallow pool beneath the roots of an old oak tree. A carp was there. Gyeongho lay down on the bank. He dipped his hand into the water. It was icy. His fingers went numb in seconds. He waited. The fish didn't bite. He closed his eyes. He remembered. In a past life, he used to buy live fish at the Tsukiji market. He would stand by the stalls and watch as fishermen caught eels with their bare hands in the icy water. Calmly, without any sudden movements. The fish sense the vibration. They sense fear. They sense impatience. He steadied his breathing. His hand in the water became one with the bottom. A minute passed. 2. 3. A dark shadow moved from beneath a root. Slowly, cautiously. The carp was as long as an elbow, black with a silvery belly. It swam over Gyeongho's fingers. Gyeongho didn't move. The carp swam back. It stopped. Gyeongho clenched his fingers. In one motion, the carp thrashed, heavy, strong. Gyeongho pulled it ashore. Sori held out the bag. The carp fell inside, alive. 12 seconds from the moment it touched the water to the bag. Gil-soo whistled softly. Let's go. The return trip took 10 hours. They took longer because they had to bypass a new patrol that had appeared on the southern trail. Tae-soo stopped the group twice and pressed them to the ground when he was hearing dogs. By nightfall, they were back at the dead fox, alive, with the fish. Gyeongho opened the sack. The carp was alive, lethargic but alive. Row inside. He could feel it by the fish's weight. A female. Full. Ready to spawn. He placed the carp in a barrel of water. The fish came to life. It began swimming in circles. Gyeongho sat down nearby and watched it. 9 days until the tournament. Fish. Sauce. The heavenly table technique. The memory of 2 lives. That should be enough. And if not, in a month the guild hunters will come and take his tongue. Gyeongho thought of Do-hyun. He remembered how Do-hyun had licked a drop of blood off the blade. He remembered the knife in his own back. He clenched his fists. He whispered into the darkness of the kitchen that they would come for his tongue, that they would take it. But first, the tournament. Hwaron Square was buzzing like a cauldron on a high flame. 10,000 people, grandstands, flags, the city council box, the merchant houses box, the culinary chambers box, and a separate box bearing a crest Gyeongho had never seen before. A silver spoon on a black field. The guild. They'd sent observers. 3 men in dark clothes, their faces hidden behind shields. Their rank was impossible to discern. Gyeongho took note of this and committed it to memory. In the center of the square stood 2 kitchens. Open air. 2 hearths. 2 tables. 2 sets of ingredients. On the left was the Hwan House kitchen. Griffin meat on a silver platter. Golden ginseng root in a glass flask. Spices in silk pouches. 3 assistants in uniform. And the chef. The Hwan House court chef. Ma Jin-soo, 6th star. broad-shouldered, confident, hands like shovels. He stood behind the table and looked at Gyeongho as if he were an insect. On the right was Gyeongho's kitchen, an empty table, one cast-iron pot, one knife, a bag from which nothing could be seen. Gyeongho stood barefoot in a simple apron, a 3-star chef, 3 stars against 6. The audience laughed. Minjung sat in the Hwan House box, wearing new gloves, smiling from ear to ear. He leaned toward his neighbor and said loudly enough for the front rows to hear that the young cook had brought a bag and a pot, that this would be quick. Sori stood at the edge of the square with a black book. Tae-soo was beside her. Gil-soo was behind them. Son-nim was nowhere to be seen. Kyung-ho didn't look for her. The judge stood up. An 8th-star elder from the chamber announced the rules. Each chef would prepare one dish. A jury of 3 8th-rank judges would evaluate them. The dish with the highest essence and taste rating would win. They began. Ma Jin-soo moved first. Quickly, confidently, he placed the griffin meat on the cutting board. 3 assistants worked like a well-oiled machine. One chopped, the second prepared the sauce. The third tended the fire. A piece of griffin meat cost 80,000 gold, a 6th-star ingredient. Ma Jin-soo knew one technique, raw power. An expensive ingredient plus intense heat plus plenty of spices. Force against force. That's how everyone cooked on this continent. The meat sizzled over the fire. The smell swept across the square. 10,000 people drew in a deep breath. Rich, heavy, opulent. The smell of money and power. Minjung leaned back in his chair. Gyeongho didn't look at the neighboring kitchen. He opened the sack. He took out a barrel. Inside the barrel, floating in water, was a carp. Alive, black with a silvery belly. He took out the carp and placed it on the table. With a single stroke of his knife, he slit open its belly. Caviar. Orange gold. Small. Shiny. He scooped the roe into a small bowl, 112 grams. He poured in a spoonful of 3-month-aged soy sauce. He stirred it. He placed it on the cast-iron pan. Temperature. Layers of color. Blue, green, green-yellow. 63 degrees. Exactly. He kept the bowl at 63 degrees. Not a degree higher or lower. 45 minutes. The room fell silent. He stood motionless, one hand on the bowl, the other monitored the coals. The roe slowly changed color, from orange to dark gold. The sauce was being absorbed. The glutamate from the fermented beans entered every roe and bound with the carp's fat. The carp's fat carried an essence that ordinary fish did not contain. The underground carp lived in water saturated with the essence of the forest. Its roe was a concentrate, and the sauce was a multiplier. And the temperature of 63 degrees was the key that unlocked the locks without breaking them. Ma Jin-soo finished first. His dish stood on a silver tray, griffin saddle in golden ginseng sauce. Steam rose in a column. The flame above the tray blazed. 6 stars. Essence 6,200. The hall gasped. A 6. Pure. No cheating. 80,000 gold pieces on a plate. Minjung stood up and bowed to the audience, as if it were his achievement. Gyeongho did not raise his head. He counted the minutes. 42. 43. 44. 45. He removed the small pot from the heat. The caviar was ready. A dark, golden mass with a scent so potent it made Gyeongho's head spin. He took a quail egg, boiled that morning at 63 degrees. He cut it in half and placed it on a spoon. A spoonful of caviar on top. A drop of sesame oil. A strip of zest for 3 seconds. He removed it. The finishing touch. He took a pinch of burnt salt. He raised his hand. The square was watching. 10,000 eyes. He opened his fingers. The salt fell on the egg like snow. The plate flared up. The numbers flew by. 4 stars. 5. 6. The hall fell silent. 6 stars. 7. The plate flickered and lit up so brightly that the front rows squinted. 7 stars. Essence 7,400. Made with a quail egg and caviar from the underground carp. The cost of the dish. The egg costs 3 kopecks. The sauce takes 3 months to ferment, and the beans cost 10 kopecks. The caviar is free from the forbidden forest. The oil is hand-pressed. The zest comes from a market citrus fruit for 1 kopek. Burnt salt, made from ordinary salt, costs half a kopek. Total cost,
Less than 20 medyaks.
a 7-star dish for 20 medyaks versus a 6-star dish for 80,000 gold. The hall was silent. 10,000 sips and not a sound. The tax on speech. Gyeongho raised his spoon. He was a 3. A 7-star dish would kill him. It would tear his meridians apart, blood from every pore. He brought the spoon to his lips. Sori screamed from the crowd. No! Tae-soo stepped forward. Gyeongho took a bite. A tiny piece. A quarter of a caviar bead. The world turned white. The pain was absolute. Every meridian in his body tensed like a string and vibrated. His throat constricted, then relaxed. It snapped. Blood flowed from his nose, from the corner of his mouth, from under his fingernails. Gyeongho stood. He didn't fall. He stood in the square before 10,000 people and remained on his feet because if he fell, the dish wouldn't count. The display above his head went wild. 3 stars were flashing. The essence was tearing through the ceiling. 300 out of 300. A barrier. 1 more. The last one before the 4th. He stood in a pool of blood and stared at his display. The barrier was crushing him. His body was dying. And the barrier burst.
3 became 4.
The 4th star. Before the eyes of 10,000 people, the half-blood chef had broken through 2 stars in a single tournament. Gyeongho wiped away the blood. He placed the spoon on the table. He turned to the judges. The 8th star chief judge was standing. He wasn't sitting. He was standing. He had stood up when he saw the 7-star badge. His hands were shaking. He took the spoon. He tasted it. He closed his eyes. His body shuddered. The badge flickered. The judge opened his eyes. They were filled with tears. He lowered the spoon. He slowly sank to his knees. He bowed. To the floor. The senior 8-star judge on his knees before the 4-star chef. The second judge tasted it. The third. Both stood up. Both bowed. 3 8-star judges on their knees in Kvarana Square. 10,000 people witnessed it. The silence was so thick you could hear the wind rustling the flags in the stands. Min-jung jumped to his feet. His face was pale. His gloves were clenched into fists. He leaped over the railing of the box. He snatched a knife from the nearest guard. He lunged at Gyeongho. Tae-soo was faster. He grabbed Min-jung's arm. He twisted it. A bone cracked.
The knife flew into the dust.
Min-jung screamed. Not from pain, from rage, from humiliation. Tae-soo held him with one hand. A 3 was holding a 5 because Tae-soo wasn't just any 3. He was the 3 whom Gyeongho had trained. His meridians were purer and more efficient than those of half the 5s in this city. In the Hwang House box, Hwang Seong-woo stood up. His face was stony. He looked at Min-jun on the ground with a broken arm. He looked out at the square, at the 10,000 witnesses. In a steady voice, he declared that the House of Hwan was disowning Hwan Min-jun, that his actions had brought shame upon the family, that from this day forward, he was neither son nor brother. Min-jun froze. He looked at Seong-woo, his face contorted. He shouted that it was a lie, that his brother had promised, that they had made an agreement. Seong-woo turned away and sat down. The guards dragged Min-jung away. In the city council gallery, a figure rose to her feet, one that Gyeongho recognized from Sori's description. A young woman, expensive clothes, a 4th-grade tunic, Princess Chae Ha-in. She raised her hand. The hall fell silent.
She announced that, by right of royal blood,
The license to supply the Royal Academy of Magic was being transferred to Dole Lisa's institution, effective today. The square erupted in a roar. Professor Chang Iju sat on the podium. His monocle had fallen and was hanging from its cord. His cheeks were wet. He did not wipe away his tears. Captain Yoon Dae-jung stood by the podium in his Royal Guard uniform, 6th class tunic. He looked at Gyeongho. Then he slowly removed his glove. He dropped to one knee right into the dust of the square. He said that the chief must say a few words, and the guard would follow. Gyeongho stood in the center of the square. Blood on his apron, blood on his hands, a size 4 tunic. He wasn't looking at Dae-jung, not at the princess, not at the judges. He was looking at the box with a silver spoon on a black field. The guild's box. There sat the man Gyeongho had been searching for since his first day in this world. Young, in fine clothes, a 5-star tunic, a face Gyeongho knew better than his own. Lee Do-hyun. Here he was called Yi-do, representative of the Silver Spoon Guild. Their eyes met across the square. Do-hyun sat motionless. His face was pale. He looked at Gyeongho, and Gyeongho saw in his eyes what he wanted to see. Recognition. Do-hyun knew. He knew who was standing in that square in a blood-soaked apron. Gyeongho approached the guild's box. Quiet. The square roared, but between them, there was silence. Gyeongho pulled a second spoon from his belt. The same one. Egg, caviar, sauce. He placed it in front of Do-hyun. "Try it," he said. Do-hyun stared at the spoon. His hands wouldn't move. Gyeongho said it was that very same sauce, that very same technique, that very same flavor Do-hyun had tasted 20 years ago at the White Heron when he was a dishwasher. When Gyeongho taught him how to hold a knife. When Gyeongho entrusted his kitchen to him. Do-hyun picked up the spoon. Slowly. He put it in his mouth. He chewed. His face changed. The mask cracked. Beneath it was the face of the young boy whom Gyeongho had pulled out of the dishwasher 20 years ago. Do-hyun dropped the spoon. His lips trembled. He whispered a single word. A question. "You." Gyeongho leaned toward him, close, so that only the two of them could hear. He said he'd promised him his tongue, that he'd take it.
But first, his reputation, then his recipes, then his stars, and then his tongue. He straightened up, turned around, walked across the square. The square roared his name. So Gyeongho, So Gyeongho, So Gyeongho. He didn't look back. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the stones. The 4th star burned above his head. Sori ran alongside him. Tae-soo followed behind. Gil-soo waited at the exit from the square. They were leaving, the 4 of them, just as they had arrived. At that moment, in a distant box that Gyeongho hadn't noticed, a figure rose to his feet. Tall, thin, dark, unmarked clothing, an 8th star tabard. Master Yeom Gi-hoon, head of the Silver Spoon Guild. He stood there, clapping slowly. Standing next to him was a figure that no one but Gyeongho could see, because Gyeongho had turned at the sound of the applause. And he saw it. The man behind the master's shoulder. Ash-colored skin, eyes without pupils. A bone-carving knife on his belt. Not metal, bone. Human bone. An ambassador from outside this kingdom. Master Yeom Gi-hoon stopped clapping. He looked out at the square. He spoke softly, but his voice traveled across the stones like a vibration. He said he congratulated Chief So, and that Chief So had just awakened what they had been lulling to sleep for 20 years. The ground beneath the square trembled. Once. A dull thud. Deeply. The stones beneath Gyeongho's feet swayed. People in the stands grabbed the railings. Someone screamed. It shook, and then fell silent. But Gyeongho felt it. Below. Deep beneath the capital. Beneath layers of stone and earth and roots. Something stirred. Something ancient and hungry. Something that had slept for 20 years and awoken at the scent of a 7-star dish. Gyeongho stood in the square and looked down at his feet. Then he raised his head. He looked at the Magister. The Magister was smiling. The ambassador of Ash stood motionless. Gyeongho turned and walked on.
The 4th star. Blood on his apron. His team behind him. The enemy ahead. The enemy behind him. The enemy beneath his feet. He left the square and did not look back. A knife lay in his apron pocket. Sharpened. Clean. Ready. Ahead lay the guild. Ahead lay Do-hyun. Ahead lay that which slumbered at the bottom of the ancient cauldron beneath the capital and was awakening from the dish of the 10th star.
Gyeongho walked down Hwaran Street, thinking about how half a lemon had been lying on his cutting board on the night of the murder, and that someone had called him here for a reason.